We read the Kinnos of Tisha B'Av. We can't read the Kinnos of Tisha B'Av without a little bit of background. I don't want to belabor it because I want to spend our time mostly about the emotions of the Kinnos and reading the Kinnos with the emotions. But the mysterious and mystical personality of Rabbi Elazar HaKalir runs consistently through our Ashkenazi Kinnos. So I can't, I have to give a slight amount of background for framework before we begin. Rabbi Elazar HaKalir, we know nothing of his life. We have suggestions as to when and where he lived, ranging from that he was there at the time of the Churban of the second Beis Hamikdash, which would place him almost 2,000 years ago, to suggestions that he lived in Italy in the 900s. I mean, you can't have as much of a wide range as that. My own feeling, I don't want to get into my own feelings about it, but it's not time for Tisha B'Av. Rabbi Elazar HaKalir was a brilliant and very, very difficult in the sense of his poetry. His poetry is very difficult, very complex. We can divide his poetry into the Kinnos that he wrote into 2 or 3 basic styles. I'm going to divide them for our purposes into 2 basic styles. Those that are described in a particular historical event, which are the ones that we're going to go through more carefully because they're easier to read. There's more to explain and understand them. They draw a lot more emotion out of ourselves. And the ones that are more a collection of passages. Now, it may indeed be the one, like the first one, the Shavas Surumeni, that we're going to read. I'm going to skim rather than read. May have more to them on a deeper level than the others that we skip, the others that we are gonna, and let me explain why. Among Kalir's many qualities was that he was a huge Mekubal. The Shibbolei Aleket writes about Rabbi Elazar HaKalir's Kinnos that at the time that he composed or sang his Kinnos, the angels danced to the words of his Kinnos. Let me arrange something like camera better here. Better before I start with it. Okay. The Arizal did not say Piyutim from many of our Paitanim, many of our poets, but he did say the Kalirs because he said the Kalir understood Kabbalah extremely deeply, and he could see the Kabbalah reading through his Piyutim and his Kinnos. So it may very well be that the passages that we find so, I would say, incomprehensible, or that they are incomprehensible, very difficult, not incomprehensible, difficult to understand, and in which he jumps from topic to topic constantly, as we'll see in this one. I'll explain this first one and we'll see what I mean better, could indeed be the ones in which he was touching on huge Kabbalah ideas. And that's why to us we're left with, like, it seems to be like he's just jumping from subject to subject. So that is part of why this may be so difficult. Our goal for our purposes is to draw from the Kinnos some emotion and some background, some history. So I'm not going to belabor those, but I'm going to point out the complex poetry of this one. Now, Kalir was also not just a writer of Kinnos, obviously. He was a writer of most of our Piyutim. though Nusach Ashkenaz Piyutim that we say, or used to say, if you want to call it that way, on the Yom Tovim, on the special Shabbosos, the Arba Shabbosos, Chodesh, and Zachar, etc., on other special Shabbosos, a huge amount of those piyutim were written by Rav Elazar Kalier. The majority of our Kinnos are written by Rav Elazar Kalier. Here's an example of the complexity with which he presents us. If you look at Shava Surah, which in every edition of Kinnos that I've ever seen of Ashkenaz Kinnos, it's the first one listed, we will find as we go through them that the order is not always identical. The practice as to what is said is pretty much identical by all Minhagi Ashkenaz, ranging from the differences we have among Minhagi Ashkenaz, West Central European, Eastern European, Polish, Lithuanian, Hungarian, etc. Doesn't really show up in the Kinnos. The Kinnos is pretty consistent. As far as I'm aware, every minig has the same Kinnos and pretty much in the same order. Once in a while, there's an inversion of order a little bit, but Shavas is the first one in virtually in every one that I've seen. There's two backgrounds to this Kinna that are good background. He takes if you look at Eicha, which we don't say in the morning at part of davening, we say we read Eicha at night. There's a custom at the end of Kinnos, if they're between Kinnos and Mincha time or Mincha Gedola time, to read through Eicha a second time, but that's a custom. And varying on where you are, whether you'll have the opportunity to hear someone read it from a Megillah, chances are you won't. Certainly not this year. So if you look at Megillah's Eicha, Megillah's Eicha is 5 chapters. It had, by the way, Eicha has a almost unique related specific situation that the chapter headings that have become common custom for Jews to use are Christian in origin. In other words, through all of our Tanakh, our 24 books of Tanakh, our chapter headings are Christian. The origin of our breaks in Sifrei Tanakh are based on psuchos and stumos, which we're familiar with. In Sifrei Torah, you have a break in the Sefer Torah where you have either a line skipped in the middle or a end of a line missing. The divisions that we use today most likely to use chapters, numbers as divisions. The chapter number divisions were Christian. Jews began to use them when they were being debated by Christians and had to find what the Christians were talking about. And then they found that that's a convenient place to find a pasuk. When I teach, if I tell somebody where the parak and the pasuk is, they can find it almost immediately. If I tell them, well, it's the third or fourth psucha after this or that, it's harder to find it. So it became habit to use it. Most Gedolei Yisrael will use the Prakim and Psukim for finding things. There's a number of noted Gedolei Yisrael that refused to use Prakim and Psukim to find things because they felt that that's a Christian in origin. We should use our own Masorah. Among those Gedolim that refused to use it with Chafetz Chaim, with Meir Simcha, the Archameach, just as examples of Gedolim who refused to use the Prakim system. Now, 2 of the Sifrei Tanakh, the Prakim we have are of Jewish Masorah, and those are Tehillim. Okay, our 150 chapters of Tehillim. Originally, there were 148 chapters of Tehillim. 2 of them were subsequently divided. But the divisions into chapters of Tehillim is a Masorah that we have, our Masorah, and Eicha. The 5 chapters of Eicha are our Masorah. In other words, the divisions of Eicha into chapters that we have as our Masorah. So we can be proud of this Masorah. We should use it fully. Eicha is 5 chapters. All 5 chapters, I can correct that. 4 of the 5 chapters are 22 psukim. In other words, the association of the Aleph Beis ties very, very closely to the Sefer Eicha. The four of the five prakim, the first four prakim, all follow an Aleph Beis pattern, meaning that first, second, and fourth chapters are 22 psukim following an Aleph Beis. The only difference is that in some of the chapters, the pei and the ayin is reversed, not in the first chapter. And the reason why the pei and the ayin is reversed, according to Medrash, is because the Tisha B'Av, of course, is on the day of the Meraglim. They put their peh before their ayin. Their mouth, the pei, and the ayin is the eye. Instead of looking to see what it was, they decided in advance what they were going to be looking for. So for that reason, the peh and the ayin are reversed, okay, in several of the chapters of Eicha. The third chapter of Eicha is a triple Aleph Beis. It's 66 psukim. In other words, 3 Alephs, 3 Beis, 3 Gimels, etc. First, second, and fourth are a regular Aleph Beis pattern. The fifth chapter of Eicha, okay, has 22 psukim. It's not in an Aleph Beis pattern. In the piyutim that were written for the repetition of Shemona Esrei on Tisha B'Av, I doubt that any of us heard those piyutim said. It has been many years since I was in a shul that said piyutim on Tisha B'Av. Piyutim have fallen by the wayside today, unfortunately. Aside from the Kinnos of Tisha B'Av, piyutim said on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, there's Ental and Geshem. I can't think of very many piyutim that are said regularly today. The German Kehillas do still have piyutim. There's not much of them left, but there are some. And the Siddish Kehillas, to a certain degree, still say piyutim. But the basic minig of saying piyutim has been forgotten. There's very, very little left of places in which piyutim are still said. But if you have a Sefer Kinnos that has the piyutim, there are in the Chazaras shots of Tisha B'Av. It means that when the Chazan repeated the Shemona Esrei, at the end of every bracha of Shemona Esrei, he would stop. People would recite a small passage of poetry about Tisha B'Av, and that was most of the Shemona Esrei. There's one bracha where there isn't any, which is a conversation for until B'nai Yerushalayim. Until B'nai Yerushalayim, there's this piyutim. These piyutim, okay, after the B'nai Yerushalayim. So if you corresponded, it's going to sound a little complicated. Look for a moment, if you have handy, Sefer Eicha, the fifth parak. Flip back to Sefer Eicha, the fifth parak, and you'll see that the 15th pasuk of the fifth parak, okay, starts with the word Shavas. Okay, now, if you go back to the corresponding pasuk, it's the 15th pasuk of the first, second, and fourth chapter of Eicha, and you'll see that it starts with a samach at that point. Okay, all those three. If you go back to the third parak, it's not the 15th pasuk, but the corresponding samach, okay, which I guess must be the 43rd pasuk. Okay, now look at Shavas Surumeni. I'm just going to look at the first paragraph, and we're going to see that the entire Kina is based on this. I'm just going to show you an overview. The first word of the Kina is Shavas. That's taken from the fifth chapter of Eicha, the 15th pasuk, the first word. Why the 15th pasuk? Because the first 14 psukim had corresponding to them piyutim in the repetition of the Shemona Esrei. So this piyut was placed at the beginning of our Kinnos because its purpose was to connect the piyutim that were said at the repetition of the Shemona Esrei with the Kinnos. So he picked up from where the Shemona Esrei repetition has finished and began with this piyut. You look at the word, just hold for a second, the fifth chapter of Eicha with this first kinna, and you'll notice, look at the first word of each stanza. The 15th pasuk of Eicha, of the fifth chapter of Eicha, starts with Shavas. The 16th pasuk starts with Nofla. The 17th pasuk starts with Al. The 18th pasuk again starts with Al. Right. The next pasuk starts with Atah. The one after with Lama. The one after with Hashivenu, and the one after with Ki. And then there's a stanza to complete the kinna and to connect it to the next kinna. Okay, so this is the complexity of it, but we just started. If you then take, let's take Shabbos, the first stanza, and you'll see that each afterwards it's a series of samachs. Now those samachs, each one goes back to Eicha. Shabbos was the 15th pasuk of the fifth chapter. Suru is the 15th pasuk of the fourth chapter. Schi, Sakosa, and Sakosa are the samachs of the third chapter, which has 66 psukim, of triple olive bays. Safku is the 15th pasuk of the second chapter. Excuse me. Sila is the 15th pasuk of the first chapter. Now, what Rabbi Lazar Kalir did here, and he combined all 5 chapters of Eicha, not only with this Rosh Tevos, but with their messages and their themes. In other words, at times, reading these stanzas can't be figured out unless you go back to the psukim in Eicha that he took them from. You have to understand each pasuk of Eicha he's referring to. Then see what he quoted of this, and putting everything together, you now get a sense of what he was saying. It's incredibly poetic, incredibly complex. To me, almost takes away from the idea of Tisha B'Av in a sense, because here we're spending time analyzing poetry instead of getting into the emotions of it. The Mukubalim were very attracted to Kalir's kinnis for this because they saw in these types of kinnis huge Kabbalistic ideas. As I mentioned before, the Shibbolei Aleket and the Arizal as sources of this. On the other hand, the philosophers were very opposed to this. So the Ibn Ezra, who wrote a long essay in his parish on Koheles, he wrote a long essay criticizing Kalir and writing that Kalir should not be used. Now, he wasn't talking about there specifically about Tisha B'Av. He was talking about using his piyutim in general. And he criticizes using Kalir for piyutim as sources of piyutim. He has several reasons why he criticizes them. One is exactly this point, the complexity of trying to understand what you're saying. He says piyutim are meant to be prayers. He says we have no prayers that cannot be understood on a very simple level. Sure, they can be understood on a deeper level, but they first have to be understood on a simple level. And you can't understand a lot of what Kalir writes on a simple level. You have to study it, and it has no simple shot. That was Ibn Ezra's first criticism. He had other criticisms about Kalir, his grammar. He reuses words frequently, but that's standard. But Ibn Ezra said, like, if you're writing a prayer, you don't invent the meaning of the word for your prayer. He takes words and gives them slightly different meanings. Takes words that are verbs, makes them into nouns, etc. Well, that language grows that way. Poets write that way, but Ibn Ezra says prayers aren't written that way. Ibn Ezra himself was a major Paitan, and Ibn Ezra says that instead of using Kalir for piyutim, you should use piyutim from Sadi Gaon. Sadi Gaon's piyutim are very, very clear and very, very simple in their prayers. We Ashkenazim say almost nothing from Sadi Gaon. We have a couple of places, not much, but that's the background. So now that we've gotten background, we understand what this very complex kinna is, why it's the first and the introduction to the kinnis. All this we understand. I'm just going to I'm going to do the first one just so we get a sense of how complex this is. I'm going to then take from this kinna uh, certain pieces that I'm going to explain, which are beautiful and have huge emotion to them. But I don't think, maybe I'll read the whole one. So as we explained it, the first one, the Shavas, you're going backwards through the end of Eicha. We're going, no, we're going in order. We're going we're going the end, the fifth parak backwards to the first. Okay. We're going through the Samachs, which is the correspondence to the 15th pasuk of each chapter, except for the third, where it's the 43rd chapter. The next chapter, Nafla, is the 16th, etc. We go through to the end of each chapter of Eicha. Okay, that's what he did with this kinna. Reading the kinna on its own is almost just try to read the words and translate them without understanding the psukim they're taken from and the midrashim he's hinting at is also very difficult to understand. Now remember, Rebbe Elazar Kalir was a contemporary of our midrashim. So this is something we don't need to say for this kinna, but for other kinnas we'll see that his version of the medrash is different sometimes than our version of the midrash. And he was earlier than the probably, depending on when he lived, he may have been earlier than the versions of the midrashim, many times earlier than the versions of midrashim that we have. So the fact that his version varies from the medrash should be viewed as different midrashim, machlokasin among midrashim. We know that we have machlokasin among midrashim. Okay, so that's again, right, the same beauty and the power of the source of who Rebbe Elazar Kalir was. So the words of the kinna. Now let's go back to Eicha. Thumb your finger Eicha at the same time here. Shavas, if you look back the 5th chapter of Eicha, the 15th pasuk. Shavas mesos libeinu nehepach la'evo mecholenu. Okay, the joys of our heart ended. Right, our celebration, our machol, our dancing, our celebration was turned into mourning. That's what the pasuk means. Okay. Now, just for a second, hold back, and since you're in Eicha already, turn back to the 4th parak of Eicha. Okay, and the 15th pasuk there is Suru Tameh. Get away. So our enemies yelling at us. Get away, you Tameh one. That's what they call to us. Suru, get out of here. Altigo, don't touch us. Okay? Kinotsu gamno. You're wanderers. You don't belong here. Amru v'goyim le'yosifu lagur. You don't belong to live with us anymore. Now turn back to the 3rd chapter of Eicha, to the Samachs, which is the 43rd, 44th, and 45th psukim. And we're going to go in reverse order. So we're going to do the 45th pasuk first. And the reason is because, remember, he's going in backwards order. He's going from the 5th to the 4th to the 3rd. When he does the 3rd, he does the psukim in reverse order. So, Sechiyu ma'os tesimeinu. They made us like filth, like scum, b'kerev ha'amim, among the nations. Sakosa ba'anan loch. You covered over with a cloud, me'avor tefillah, so that our tefillah doesn't go through to you. This is something that was a reason why, among other reasons, there are many halachic even sources that come through because of this, where we say that our tefillahs were covered over on Tisha B'Av. Sakosa ba'af, I'm now going back to pasuk mem gimel of the 3rd Eicha. Sakosa ba'af. You covered yourself up with anger. Vatirdefenu, and you chased us away. Haragta, you killed us. Lo chamalta, you had no mercy. Okay, so now for the moment, let's go back to the Kinnos that we're reading. Okay, and we're going to read the first paragraph here, the first stanza, and we'll see what it means on a literal and a simple level. We're not going into the Kabbalah level. This is just the pshat level, the simple level. Shavas, okay, at the time that they told us, right, our joy, at the time that our joy ended, all our joys have ended. That's what the word shavas means. As they look back to the Eicha to understand it. Our joys have ended. Suru meni shmauni ochrai. Get out of here. Okay, that's what those who made life difficult for us. That's what they made us hear. That's what they told us. That's what they made us hear. Going back to the third Eicha. Schi, filth, mos, disgust. Hesimuni, that's what they made me. The edre chaverai, among the flocks of my associates, if you want to call it that way, the other nations. How do we know that? Where is he? He's referring back to the third Eicha. Sakosa mishkan misachos dibura. You covered over my mishkan from allowing my tefillas, my diburim, right, to be heard. The word schos, of course, we're going poetic here. Haskei sushma Yisrael. Okay, my tefillas couldn't be heard. Sakosa, again, you blocked up. Okay. And my great leaders, my good warriors, were overwhelmed. Which is in the Haftarah today. Now going back to the second chapter of Eicha. Safku alayach kapayim kol derech. They rejoiced over us. Okay, all those who passed by us while we were being driven into Bogo, okay, clap their hands. They clap their hands in rejoicing. Okay, going back to the Shabbos, Sofku Kaf, they rejoiced over us. And my innards tottered. Going back to the last Kisilach al Abiroi, going back to the first chapter of Eicha. Silach al Abiroi, and here he quotes, right, the entire pasuk, the first three words of the pasuk. And we're going to find he does that through the entire Kinnos. Going back to Eicha Parak Aleph pasuk Tezvav, Silach al Abiroi, Hashem b'kirbi, okay, Hashem took all my powerful people, right, who were in my midst, okay, and he pushed them aside. And that's how it closes this capital, this stanza of the Kesilach al Abiroi. That's the way. Now, if we follow this pattern through the entire Kinnos, this one, we'll see, this runs the pattern of the entire Kinnos. I'm not going to do that right this moment because I want to go through the next stanzas and point out what he wove in at the same time, which is something we can identify more emotionally than this poetry. This is huge poetry. The second stanza, okay, in addition to everything I just told you that he did in the first stanza, in the second one, he also attaches ourselves emotionally with contrast. The second and third one, he has some huge contrasts here. Naflo Odenu b'tzur d'chiyah, our motion of Odenu. Okay, again, I'm not going to go through everything, but if you look back, and you can't do anything but do this to explain what he's talking about here. In the Odenu is from the fourth parak of Eicha. Look back as we're following our pattern here, if you've been following what I'm saying. Okay, the fourth chapter of Eicha, Odenu tichlena einenu el ezraseinu hodel. Our Odenu, we still, from the word Od, right? Odenu Tichanonenu, our eyes still try, right? El Ezraseinu, to see our salvation, our help. But Havel, but we didn't have it. It doesn't come back to us. We're missing it. It doesn't, it's empty. Havel means missing, temporary, transitory, right? We don't see it. But Tzipiyasenu, Tzipinu, we look out with hope, El Goylo Shishia, to a nation that doesn't help, doesn't come to save us. In the Pina, so Odenu has the same meaning. Bitsul D'chiyah, which is all taken from Sukkim and Tanakh, refers to the Greek culture. And it means that Jews got very involved in Greek culture. And the point I want to bring out here is, which Korban is he talking about over here? If he's talking about the Greeks, he doesn't mean the Greeks was the third, according to most opinions, the third of the four Goliaths. Okay, the fourth Goliath was Rome. Okay, unless Khalil held like the Ibn Ezra, and it's not a conversation for now about what the four Goliaths were. But the way we usually assume the four Goliaths were Bavel, Paras, Persia, Greece, or the Hellenists, and the Seleucids, and the Hanukkah, run up to the Hanukkah story, and Rome. Well, Eicha is talking about the first, that's the Golas Bavel. He's going to, in this paragraph, combine all the messages of Eicha that we just told about to all the later Korbanos and all the later Goliaths. He puts them all together. So the Odenu B'tzul D'chiyah refers to Greece and thereby Rome, because Roman culture was basically Greek culture. Eini Chiksa L'chazon ben Berachia, that's your Zechariah ben Berachia. Okay, now Zechariah ben Berachia was also at the beginning of the second, or the end of the first Korban, but more at the beginning of the second bias. Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi are the last three of the Malach, of the Nevi'im. And the dreams of Zechariah, if you look at Sefer Zechariah, the 14 Prakim Sefer Zechariah, the end of Treyoser, it's the things like we say, Ode, again, will there be older and younger people sitting in Yerushalayim? Okay, we will again sit in the days of Yerushalayim, the days we will sing Kol Chas and Kol Chala. It's the purposes of consolation he talks about. So, Eini Chiksa L'chayzon ben Berachia, right? I was waiting for some salvation. That's what we talked about in the Sukkim and Eicha he quoted. Not only at the Churban of the first Beis HaMikdash, but the Churban of the second Beis HaMikdash. Okay, and my eyes were waiting to see the dreams, the nevuos of Zechariah that are going to tell us that our redemption is happening. Okay, we did that. But at the same time, Ad Pile Gilgal Chavuya, but those dreams of the future Geula are still hidden, Chavuya, right? While we have the Pile Gilgal, until the miracles of Gilgal repeat themselves. So the miracles of Gilgal refer to when Klal Yisrael entered Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Canaan, in the days of Yehoshua. You had all the miracles of Gilgal, both the getting across in the Yarden and the battles of Gilgal. There are all these huge miracles that happened, and those miracles are not history at this point only. We will have such miracles repeating themselves when, Yetz Hashem, when we have the third Geula, the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi built. We will have this again. Eini me'oleles b'nyovenis nechuya. My eyes grieve over the burning that took place, the burning, you could say, that happened by the Greeks, and here it emphasizes the Greek language, which is an emphasis on the Talmidim who were lost in the period of the Greek and Roman era, okay, to a foreign culture. Also, HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought the Churban, V'nicham, then he had Necham on it, which is something that's referring to a Medrash Eicha, which we're going to talk about later. By Yikra L'Bechia, we were called together to cry V'nam Alei Bochia. again, the next Kinna. Okay.
Baby, I'm sorry. Which kin are you up to?
I'm still in the first one.
Thank you.
Many. Okay, we're still in this Kinna. Third stanza of the Kinna. Okay, Alpne Pros. Okay. The third stanza of the first Kinna. The first Kinna starts with the word Shava Surumeni, it's the third stanza. In this Kinna, he's going to talk about 4 different Churbanos that happened to Klal Yisrael. Okay, he talks about Alpne Pras, Al Naras Bovel. When we got to the rivers of Bovel, Shom Yoshav Nagam Bafhinim B'Zafrein was Sion. Okay, the Tehillim came to Kuflam Zion. When we got to the rivers of Bovel, Pnei Pras, of course, it's the Euphrates River. We're part of the Euphrates River in Bovel when we got to it. How they Suf Zachar, I'm going to go back to this in a moment. We remembered the splitting of the Yam Suf. There's this very, very bitter association of getting to the rivers of Pras and mourning in Bavel and remembering the waters of the Yam Suf. I'm going to go back to Pachad Chet Shiloh, the destruction of Shiloh, when the Mishkan Shiloh was destroyed. Tochav Sodeha, Patsu Chazire Ya'ar are the Romans. Ayeh Chasideha, Patsu Masa Erva Lenideha is a reference in the Gemara that when the Goyim got into the Beis HaMikdash and they saw the Kodesh Kodashim, the Kruvim were attached to one another in a loving manner. Now, if that's describing the actual Churban, it has to have been the first Churban of the Beis HaMikdash, because there was no, right? The Aron had been hidden at the end, and right, so it couldn't have existed anymore. More likely, it's not the first Churban either, because Yoshe had already hid it goes back to an earlier time. Okay, so we've described here 4 or 5 different Churbanos, and he's combining them all to tell you that Eicha is not just about the first Churban, but deep in lies within the messages of Sefer Eicha are many other Churbanos. I want to stop for a moment here and point out the bitterness that we're referring to when we talk about the comparisons between Pnei Pros and Palgei Suf. We're familiar with the Medrash. I see my camera fell out of place. Can you switch the camera? Oh, I think I got it back. Okay, it's better. It's better now. So the Euphrates is sweet water. I would suspect today it's highly polluted, but in the pre-pollution days, river waters were sources for towns, villages. Towns and villages were almost always built by the sides of rivers. It's a halacha when you identify a city for shtaros purposes. You identify the city by its name and the names of the water sources nearby, because every town has to be built on a water source. You have to have water for a city to survive. Rivers were used in earlier days as their water source. So every town had a river nearby or a stream nearby or natural springs nearby. And since towns can have similar names or same names, there's 2 Frankfurts that I know of, both in Germany. One was in Germany. There's 2 Tripolis. There's lots of cities with similar names and same names. So you identify the city with a river source. Between the city name and the river source, you should be able to know where the shtar was written. And that's the old system for doing so. When the Jews were driven into Golos from Bovel, so the Medrash tells us how difficult it was to be driven there. Al Naras Bubble. This is a Yalkut Shemoni on the Tehillim Kuflamet Zion Al Naras Bubble that's said before benching weekdays. So it says Al Naras Bubble Shom Yoshavnu. There we sat. Gambachinu, and we cried. There's a frameless Tzion. Now, usually, right, the simple shot would be that until that time we didn't have a chance to reflect. We'd been driven from Bovel. We had huge amount of pain and suffering and being driven from Bovel. But we didn't have any time. We were just being forced to move with taskmasters banging, pushing us along until we finally got to the Nara's Bovel. We had a chance to sit down and reflect and cry over what had happened because Zafrein was Tzio. But the Medrash doesn't take it that way. The Medrash tells us, Ma Ro Yisrael Lifkos on the Naharas Bovel. Why did the Jews start crying when we got to the Naharas Bovel? Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Harag Bahem Paras, Be Yisrael, Yosri Masha Harag Nebuchad Netzar HaRasha. The river Pras killed more Jews than Nebuchadnezzar had killed when he destroyed the Beis Hamikdash and destroyed the city of Yerushalayim. Now, when we read the Gemara and it tells us how many Nebuchadnezzar's general killed in the city of in the Beis Hamikdash grounds, according to the Gemara, he killed hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of people. So, to tell us that more died at the river Pras, why is that? Says the Medrash. When we were in Eretz Israel, we were used to drinking rainwater, spring water, rainwater. We had much better water to drink. But Kevin Shagalu Labavel, Shasu Maimi Pras, Umesu, the water of the Pras was not nearly as refined, not as pure. Leficha Chayu Boichin al Harugim Shahargu Ben Oyeveim, Vachal Mesim Shemesu Bederech, Val Harugim Shaharg Ben Pras. Continues the Medrash, but I'm going to hold for that point because I want to show the comparison to what we talk about Al Yamsuf. The Yamsuf is salt water. It's not drinkable water. The Medrash tells us that when we got to the Yamsuf, there were many miracles happened, most of which are not in the pasuk, but are hinted at in Midrashim, mentioned in Midrashim, hinted at in Psukim. And it talks about the Pal Gesuf, the splittings of the Yamsuf. What do you mean splittings of the Yamsuf? Well, there were 12 Shvatim of Klal Yisrael. Each one had their own tunnel in the Yamsuf. The waters of the Yamsuf themselves are not clear, but when the Jews went through the Yamsuf, the waters were clear so that you, each Shevet could see the other Shvatim. So they were completely covered by the Yamsuf in their own little tunnel. And it tells us that if somebody would get thirsty during that trek through the Yamsuf, which probably took about 5 minutes, they could take their hand or a cup to the water wall that was alongside them. It came out of water like a water fountain into their hand or into their cup. And they had this delicious water to drink, fresh water. For 1 second, the Yamsuf was not drinkable. So we have this very bitter association at the time of the leaving Mitzrayim, Kriyas Yamsuf, crossing the Yamsuf. The salt water of the Yamsuf became, with all its miracles, among many other things, it became fresh water, perfectly drinkable fresh water. When we got to Pras, the fresh water of the Pras ended up being the source of untold pain and death. So we had this strange combination, terrible comparison of, at the time of the Tsaris, even the fresh water was bitter, And the time of Geula, even bitter water is fresh. Skip ahead to the stanza Ata Kalim Hikvadita. Again, if we follow this through the five echos, we have the same pattern. Okay, the fifth, fourth, third paragraph in reverse order, second and first. Following the psukim, except in the two previous stanzas with the phase and the ayins, are kept consistent by kalir in order, and in the echa they're out of order. But you take them here in order, in the order that we would read them, not the order they are in Megillas Eicha. I just want to refer to the column Hichabadza here is again, it's a reference to a pasuk in Yeshaya, but the Gemara in Chagiga says that Yeshaya Hanavi got so upset at the Jews that he told them, I have, this and this and this and this and this. These are all the things that are going to happen in Cyrus until the final stage is that the people who least lead covet are the ones who are going to get covet. And the people who most get covered are the ones who are going to get them least. So kalim, those who least should be given any honor, ichbata, those are the ones that are going to be given covered. And here you look at our situation in today's world. This is exactly what we're describing. Me'edye erimuni, you stripped off my jewels. Again, a reference both back to the time that the Jews, after the Maisa Egel, Pasuk says there that they took off their edyam, their jewels that they'd been given in Har Chorev. According to some Meforshim, that means that they took off their tefillin, which is called our edy that the Kadosh Baruch Hu gave. And this is the makor, one of the makoros, that in Minig Ashkenaz, we don't wear tefillin the morning of Tisha B'Av. We put on talis and tefillin in the afternoon, but not in the morning. And that's all part of this Me'edye Erimuni. Our tefillin were removed from us. Kol Hashmiya Ba'arav Higrimuni. It's again the same stanza, it's the paragraph. I skipped one clause. We are familiar very much with the medrash that says that as we were driven from Golas, although our cousins, the Arabim the Arabs came to join, and the Bavalim said, and when the Jews asked, the Bavalim, can we please join our cousins, that maybe the Arabim will have some mercy on us? And the Yidden were hungry, thirsty. We came to join the Bavalim, the Arabim, and they had food for us. They had cheese, they had other salty foods, and they had flasks, which appeared to be flasks of water. So the Jews ate, figuring they'll drink afterwards. They got good and thirsty, and the flasks were empty. So the Gemara tells us the greatest suffering that a person can have is to die from thirst. And many Yidden died from thirst. A part of the medrash that is being brought through here is, in this particular stanza, he's emphasizing that we had no one to fall back on. All the nations that should have helped us out didn't. The Arabim, who were cousins, didn't. Before we talked about Kalim Chabad, our own leadership was negative, was not good leadership. They were very poor. Many of them sided with the Romans, sided with others at the times of Taurus. Karasa de Oshavei Givon, the next words here, the non-Jews of Givon had a mutual assistance pact with the Jews. If the Givonim were attacked, the Jews would come to their defense. If the Jews were attacked, the Givonim would come to their defense. Basically like NATO. Or arrangements of NATO is that any one of NATO members is attacked, it's considered as a treaty that every one of the countries is considered personally attacked and is supposed to respond accordingly. So Givon and the Jews had such an arrangement. Givon had been attacked at one time in history. The Jews came to help them. And when we were attacked, we sent messengers to Givon. We're under attack. Nobody came from giving to help. They did keep their end of the deal. Ram Haim Zerimuni. Okay, they also deceived us. They didn't follow. Kumi Avor Bahasil Rimuni. Instead, they tricked us. Karasi Lamahavai. We called out to those who are beloved ones, and they also mistreated us. Okay. The next stanza is going to refer to Yoshio Amela. The fourth chapter of Eicha, Rashi tells us in the beginning of that chapter, was a hesped, a eulogy that Yirmiyahu Hanavi said when Yoshio HaMelech was killed. We're going to have a whole kin on it later on. So I'm going to leave the discussion for that till we get to that kina. The continuing in the stanza, it says, Omo v'kas be'ivuyach gomaru. Okay, Eva Lamoshavlo, which is a pasuk we say in Hichot every day, is a reference to the Beis Hamikdash, a Kadosh Baruch Hu's beloved place. Ravta biyad Yehezkel linkom. This is what does he mean? We are fighting in the hands of Yehezkel to take vengeance. Pasuk in Sefer Yehezkel says, "Nasati es nikmasi be'edom ba'ad ami Yisrael." I will place my vengeance against Edom because of the Jewish people. But when did Yehezkel live? Yehezkel lived during the time of the Churban of the first Beis Hamikdash. Yehezkel was involved already. He records how they heard about the Churban from Bavel. Edom is Rome. That's the second Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara in Gittin tells us that the Roman generals, one of them was busy. One day he went out, he shot arrows in all directions. The arrows turned direction, Maaseh Nes, and landed in Yerushalayim. No matter which direction he fired the arrow in, it landed in Yerushalayim. He understood this to be a hint that he should destroy the city. He then, Chazal tell us that after the Nevuah ended at the beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash. This is talking about the Churban of the second Beis Hamikdash, which was about hundreds of years later. After what ended, one of the means of trying to understand if you need Nevuah is you ask a child what he learned that day in Cheder. So somehow he knew this. He asked the child, "What did you learn today in Cheder? What pasuk did you learn today?" The child answered him, "V'nakamti es mikmasi be'edom ba'ad ami Yisrael." I will take vengeance against Edom for what they did to my people of Israel. So the general said, "Hey, I don't know, there's something here fishy. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to destroy the Jews. At the same time, he's going to take punishment on me for doing so. So he wants me to do his dirty work, and then he's going to punish me for it. I'm not going to fall for it." He ran away, left the Roman armies, was Megayer, and from his descendants ended up being Talmidim who learned yeshiva in the times of the Tanoim. Also, one of the reasons mentioned for why we get driven into Golus. One of the things it says is we get driven into Golus in order to have the Gerim join us. As we go into Golus, people find out about the Jewish people that would never have known the Jewish people exist. They find out about us, they become interested in keeping Torah and mitzvahs, and they join the Jewish people. So this is also all tied in this kinna that Kalir writes. The next paragraph refers to Ramos Chatzerai. That's a pasuk in Yeshaya, which is it's one of the most heartbreaking psukim in Tanakh. When the Rebbeinu Shalom turns to the Jewish people and he says, "Why are you trampling through my courtyards?" As we go through the Beis Hamikdash, it's referred to as trampling through Hashem's courtyard. If we don't do it properly, that's the idea. It becomes very, very heartbreaking. Uh, the last one pasuk of that last piece of this paragraph, Chotzatz lahavrieni. Asudas havra'a, right, is the meal that an ovel, a mourner, is served, right, when they come back from the levaya. So the halacha is that what the neighbors have a mitzvah, a chiyuv midrabanan, to provide a meal for the avelim. Really, it's not a chiyuv on the ovel; it's a chiyuv on the neighbors. The neighbors are supposed to make sure that the ovel has a meal to eat, and it's not supposed to be purchased from the ovel's sources. It's supposed to be purchased from the neighbors' resources. In the churban of the Beis Hamikdash, okay, chatzatz is gravel, pebbles. Instead of getting a sudas havra for all the losses we suffered, all the people that we killed, there was nobody available to serve us a sudas havra. Instead, we had to eat our own gravel. Fine, that was all we had to eat was chatzatz. So we have chatzatz lahavrieni. The next stanza, kisam chakcha b'keis ofanecha. I'll translate it literally. You engraved the sincere one in the throne of your chariot. Rashi tells us in Sefer Yechezkel that on a Kodesh Baruch Hu's Merkava, whatever that means, we just know that Ma'aseh Merkava is one of the areas of Kabbalah that we are told we're not supposed to study except by having someone teach us very highlights, and then you try to figure it out on your own. Some chakcha b'kesav hanecha, right? So Yaakov Avinu's image is engraved on a Kodesh Baruch Hu's chariot. What that means, I have no idea. What Kalir understood it to mean, I have less idea. But clearly, in this paragraph, he's including those in Yonei Kabbalah, weaving it through the whole Sefer of Eicha into immensing it. Bring their punishments, the nations that are troubling us. Right? Ka'az chazos panecha, like the time when we once saw your face. Where did we see your face? So it says, Rasa shivcha al right? The common maid saw at the Yam Suf Hashem's presence more than Yechezkel saw in his greatest prophecies, his greatest nevuah. Um, uh, Tirda finishes the standard. Tirda for Salomon, it's a Ra al the chase you into the valley of death, those who are advising evil on Sunecha and Klal Yisrael. Titein lahavhav nosetsei pninecha, those who raise your jewels, which means the Beis Hamikdash. Tikra, call them l'shakam kos, to get them drunk with a cup of punishment. Chomus b'chinecha, which has already gathered up huge amounts of punishment that they deserve. Tavo kol ra'asom l'fanecha. The last paragraph, he refers to the pasuk in Amos that says that the Jews in the time of the Churban, the first fires are going to be driven to Chamos and Chema, Lachalach, Chabor. Tavo el tzar asher kilanu, limvo Chamos b'Chema nihanu, Alachalach v'Chabor higlanu, zakeinu v'chur tzlach kulanu. Ram habet nam chachulanu zechar Adonai mehayalanu. The next kinna is again by Kalecha Atz. I'm going to go through this. It took an hour on the last kinna. This one's going to be 5 minutes. So don't think that we're going to be spending hours going through each kinna. This one goes quickly. Also by Kalbir. As we read it, I'm not going to go through it in advance. You'll read it through and see. In each stanza, there's a clear comparison, and this one is an aleph base. The whole thing is 22, 24. It starts out with the alephs. HaKadosh Baruch Hu got angry and how we were treated. La Bebi Adomim. Adomim is the Romans, how the Romans described Emunecha, those who believed in you. And on the other side, there's a reference to something in Jewish history where we had where things were excellent in good situations. In Beis, it refers to Bris Ben Absarim. In the Beis, it refers to Bichunecha, those who you tested. Avraham Avinu was tested 10 times. Okay. In the Gimel Dalet stanza, it refers to Zacharta Deligus Derech, the travels that we went through. We were told that when we left Mitzrayim, okay, it was Chad Asar Yamim Mechorev Ad Kadesh Barnea, right? How quickly we could have gotten through. In the Hey and Vav, Vituk Vid Veses means an old, well-established meeting place, presumably a reference to the Mishkan, Beis Hamikdash. Ashaviata Lid Udecha, which you which had been set aside for your people. Some have the girsa, by the way, Vitarta Viudecha. Eicha the Zion, Zanachta b'zanecha, you rejected in your fury, in your anger. The Zalzel biad zarim zvulecha, the zvul is the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, and the treat with disdain in the hands of zarim, foreigners. You didn't remember the wedding that took place when we received the laws at Har Sinai. And every time we make a chasna, we remember that because we have all sorts of things we do, the torches, right, that the parents bring down when they walk the chasna kal to the chuppah, the chuppah itself, numerous other things that are mentioned that are part of the remozim of Har Sinai. Okay, Asher chakakta lechamulecha, which you engraved as laws for your loved ones. Tess says, Latrof biat tmeim telecha, your lambs will be torn apart by tmeim. V'lo zacharta yakar yedidus yoshar, you didn't remember the Torah that teaches us how to be yosher, how to be straight. Again, in the next one, Kosh Karmecha, your vineyard. Klal Yisrael is compared in Sefer Yeshaya to a vineyard. Koshlim are people who try to get other people to do things wrong, to harm them. And Lo Zacharta, the fact you said in Eicha, we said is not L'Olam Hashem, you will not despise us forever. Mem Amonim Monim Minas Echa, those who you elevated. V'lo Zachart Nesias Notzas Nesher, the fact that Eslancha Al Kanfi Nesharim, I will carry you on the wings of eagles. Okay. Asher Nasata Nitzuecha. Sachta B'Sarecha. Okay, Sarecha is a storm. Okay. Seifim are those people who, which is not the highest compliment to the Jews. We've had higher compliments in the other stanzas here. Seifim are people who go back and forth, vacillate. Sahadecha is the Aramaic word for witnesses. We attest to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We are Hashem's witness in the world, but then at the same time, unfortunately, sometimes we are Seifim. We sometimes go back and forth. V'lo zacharta oz adi adoyim, you don't remember the jewels that we wore at Har Sinai that we had before the Maisa Egel, and we were told to take them off. Asher itarta la'avodecha, that you decorated us with. Okay, I'm just going to read the whole Kinnos at this point, but that's you get this flavor of how the Kinnos was written. Eichel atzto biapecho abe biad adomim enunecho v'lo zacharta bris bein tzarim asher berarta lifnech v'chein batinu zachar Adonai v'hayolanu Eichel goarta v'garoso laglos biad geim dulecho V'lo zacharta dilug derech asher dibarta l'kolecho Uv'chein dibarnu zachar Adonai mehayalanu Eicha hagta b'hegyonecho V'hadof biad holalim hamonecho V'lo zacharta v'tok v'yud v'esnes asher v'yata l'videcho z'chotein v'chonanu zachar Adonai mehayalanu Eichel zonachta b'zamcha l'zalzel b'yad zarim z'ulecho V'lo zacharta chita chukei chorev asher chakakta l'chamulecho v'chein chivinu Zachar Adonai mehayalanu Echa tarachta b'torchacha l'trov biat mi'im tzlecho V'lo zacharta yakar yedidus yosher sheyichata l'yodecho Zachar Adonai mehayalanu Eichel kivanta b'chascho l'chalos biad koshlim karmecho V'lo zacharta lo yiznach li'olam asher limata l'kuchecho v'chein lahagnu Zachar Adonai mehayalanu Eichel milalta b'moscha limchos biad monim minasecho V'lo zacharta nesiyas notzas nesher asher yosata l'nisuecho V'chein ahinu zachar Adonai mehayalanu Eichel sachta b'sarecha l'sager biad seifim sadecho V'lo zacharta oz adei adayim asher yitarta la'avodecha v'chein ahinu zachar Adonai mehayalanu Eicha patsu b'fachtecho v'fager biad pritzim v'lecho v'lo zacharto Tzahalas fi tzedek asher tzafanta l'tzlecho v'chein tzalakta zachar Adonai mehayalanu Eicha karosa b'kriyoscha laknas biad kamim kurecho V'lo zacharta regesh rechev b'sai v'asher matzisa l'reyecha zacharim ganu zachar Adonai mehayalanu Eicha shoafta b'shoafcha l'shalos biad shalalim shlemecha v'lo zacharta tokef taltli toar asher tikanta l'smimecha v'chein nohanu zachar Adonai mehayalanu To'anu lishpoch kamoyim al mekayom ze nishpinu pamayim zachri v'yosi yoshevet b'shalom Yerushalayim Raganti v'atadeh akuk shamoyim The Kinna Adeh, third Kinna in most of the Kinnas, we're not going to read inside. I'm just going to note that clearly Kalir intended to connect the second to the third. He ends the second beginning of the third. And again, this is classic. He repeats the repetition of letters of the Aleph Beis, but each one is referencing to Psukim in Tanakh, and he's weaving together the Tanakh with the Midrashim on those Psukim in Tanakh, right, until he develops the theme of his Kinnos. And as classic in all of his Kinnos that we've mentioned so far, everyone we've seen, you can't read them and understand them. You have to study them first. And then after studying them, you try to read them, and then you begin to have a grasp of what he was getting at. I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit to Eicha Yoshva Chavatzelos HaSharon, which is 24 paragraphs. This Kinna refers to the Kohanim in the Beis HaMikdash, the Mishkan of the Beis HaMikdash, were divided. I've asked people, what do you think the Kohen did? What did the Kohen do all the time? So people tell me, oh, they were in the Beis HaMikdash. They didn't spend most of the time in the Beis HaMikdash. A Kohen was in the Beis HaMikdash literally a couple of days a year. There were 24 mishmaros of Kohanim. They were took turns every week. Every week they every week a different mishmar of the Kohanim were in the Beis HaMikdash. And of those mishmaros, they were subdivided into Batei Avos, 6 Batei Avos. So the Kohen was in the Beis HaMikdash 2 or 3 Shabbosos of the year. And those Shabbosos of the year, and 2 or 3 days of the year. That's when he did his avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. What did he do the rest of the time? The rest of the time he was living in his city, near where people were, and he was there to teach them, available, help people with questions. The 24 mishmaros are commemorated in this Eicha. Each one of them is a reference to a different one of the mishmaros. He makes allusions, which we don't know how he knew that each of these was referring to these different mishmaros. Kalir obviously had masoros on these things as to how he knew each one was referring to them. The references we have are both to psukim, to stories in the Gemara, all sorts of different things that he refers to. But how he knew that each one of these is a reference to these 24 mishmaros is something that we have to wait till Tchias HaMeisim. Meet Rebbe Elazar Kalir, find out who he was then, where he lived, etc. And at that stage, we will be able to ask him how he knew that each of these was a reference to that mishmar. The next kinna we're going to look at is on Yoshio Hanavi, Yoshio HaMelech, excuse me. This I mentioned earlier. The Rashi tells us in the 4th chapter of Eicha that the 4th chapter of Eicha was a hesped on Yoshio HaMelech, excuse me. Well, let me give you background on Yoshio HaMelech, who he was. In the first Beis HaMikdash, of course, we know that after Shlomo HaMelech died, Klal Yisrael was divided into 2 nations, referred to as Yisrael and Yehuda, or sometimes Ephraim and Yehuda, the 10 tribes and the 2 tribes. The 2 tribes had the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim, Shvatim of Yehuda and Binyamin. Smaller kingdom, the 10 tribes were in Shomron. The 10 tribes were driven into Golus by Ashur, so already after that period of time. As a matter of fact, according to the Gemara, one of the achievements of Yoshio HaMelech was that he brought back the Aseret HaShvatim, and they were under his kingship. He was the ruler of the entire nation. Yoshio HaMelech was 8 years old when he became king. His father was a Rasha. His grandfather, Menashe, was one of the biggest Rishoyim. These were all from Malchus Beis David. Menashe did tshuva at the end of his days. But Menashe is the one who had killed his grandfather, Yeshaya Hanavi, for giving him the Musar. Menashe died. It says in the pasuk that Ammon, Menashe's son, was 22 years old when he became Melech. He was Melech for 2 years. Quoting the pasuk, "Vayas hara b'nei Hashem, kasher asa Menashe aviv." Ammon was evil, did evil, and all the idols that Menashe had worshipped, Ammon worshipped. In other words, he went back to the throwback days when Menashe was an Ovid Avodah Zarah, an idol worshiper. Menashe eventually did tshuva. Ammon, here ba'ashma, he even outdid his father. His family, his servants in his palace, plotted against him, and they murdered him. They assassinated him in his house. The people who had plotted against him were in turn executed. And the new king was Yoshio, his son. He was 8 years old when he became king. He followed the ways of his father David, not turning to the right or to the left. He was 8 years old. He was still a young lad. That's when he began to be Derish Elokei David Aviv. He began to purify the cities of Judah and Yerushalayim, first of all, from all the idol worship that was there. Not only from the idol worship, also from the bamos. The bamos were built to Hashem. They were prohibited to be built, but they were mizbechos, altars for bringing korbanos to Hashem at a time that you weren't allowed to do such a thing. He cleared those out also. He cleared out all the mizbechos that were all the different avodah zaros, the sun gods. Go to the Pesukim, all the different types of avodah zarah that the Jews were worshiping. He purified Yehuda and Yerushalayim. In the cities of Menashe, Ephraim, Shimon, and Naphtali. So the question is, how did he have control over that? This is a source in the Pesukim for what Chazal tell us, that at this point he was able to gather back the golus of Jews who had been driven by Ashur, and they were under his malchus. He continues the description of how he rebuilt the Beis HaMikdash and how he got all sorts of the wonderful things he did, and how he was interested in bringing Klal Yisrael back to keeping mitzvahs, whatever he could do. He also brings in how he had two Nevi'im in his days, Huldah and Yirmiyahu Navi. Huldah, this is all part of the Pesukim here. One thing that Yoshio was not aware of, and that was he was not aware that there were many Jews that were still being Oved Avodah Zarah. The old habits of being Oved Avodah Zarah had not fallen, and they were hiding their Avodah Zarahs. And as the description is, they had their doors of their houses. Half the Avodah Zarah was behind one door, half was behind the other door. They had double doors. And they knew that when they had the double doors open so they could show people around, the Avodah Zarah was hidden. So when Yoshio's officers came, they couldn't see the fact that there was Avodah Zarah going on there. So we're now going to read this Kinnos, Eicha Eli. I'm going to explain it briefly, then we're going to read it inside. And this is about the tragedy that happened. As the story tells us in Navi, Paro Necho, the king of Egypt, came and wanted to go to war against in Ashur. And to look at the map, Eretz Yisrael is placed in a very politically significant area. If you go from Egypt to Ashur, the logical way to go is through Eretz Yisrael. So Necho sent a message to Yoshio that he meant no evil. Yoshio understood from the Psukim that no nation will ever come through you with sword, even a sword shall shalom when things are good. But what he did not realize and know was that in his era, that nevuah was not to be kept because the Jews were still being Oved Avodah Zarah. He was unaware that the Jews were being Oved Avodah Zarah, and that's why he didn't realize this. Had he sent a message to Yirmiyahu Hanavi, which he should have done, Yirmiyahu would have told him, let Paro Necho come through. Okay, they did meet in Megiddo. Paro Necho instructed his archers to only attack Yoshio. Yoshio died on the battlefield, and the last words he said were Tzadik Hashem Kipiyo Marisi. Hashem is the Tzadik. I rebelled against him. I didn't follow his instruction. I didn't go to ask the Navi for instruction what I should do. The tragedy is that Yoshio was only 39 years old when he fell in battle. He'd been Melech for 31 years, accomplished immense things. The sons and grandson of his that were Malachim afterwards, 4 of his descendants were Malachim over the next 22 years. None of them were in his stature. Most of them were Rishoyim. They were politicians, not very successful politicians. 22 years later, the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Had Yoshio been able to live those 22 years and perhaps many more decades, perhaps the Churban of the Beis Hamikdash would have been forestalled forever. So we're going to read the Kinna. The Kinna does describe here and there poetically. It's again a Kalir, so it's written poetry, deep, difficult poetry. Zera Shichor. Shichor is another way of saying the Nile River. Ochen Zera Shichor means the Mitzrayim, the Egyptians. Kisro Hatav, his gorgeous face. Pichamo Mishachor, they blackened in the war when they killed him. Okay, that's, we're going to have that through the whole Kinna, so we're just going to have to accept that. That we just have to realize that we have to study this Kinna and then afterwards try to read it. I'm just going to read it through now. Echoli kanenu meilov ben shmona shel hechel idrosh meilov Pnei cham b'Avram chanu elav lo chuzkar lo sigui mifalav Gam b'chol ha'malachim asher kamu l'gdor v'kam kamahu mimos avigdor Yovak v'avol netzonei hador asher achar hadelis lamzuzah asamu l'zdor Ochlim zera shichor kismo hatov v'chamu l'shor V'yigdal avor v'yeshiv yamin achor v'od lo shalach yadav min achor Zaku amarav kinam dos lehakim Bitza imrasa ba'ur asher lo yakim Choshachto aro kiniyatsu rechokim b'vetza moasei dos v'chukim Tovim re'im nikru kishocho ma'ah Mali v'loch hayom l'sala'ah Yedei amoritz domim b'molach Tzionei v'vitz'i es p'nei filah Ki lo hamona v'leches harav n'harayim L'man lo savor cherv al kol shahu b'efroyim Lo shamalach hazeh lo shuv acharayim Ki gzeira nigzera l'sachsech Mitzrayim v'Mitzrayim Mechatos siras mezuzos chazonan susi hechel l'vazos No anomim l'chumo l'havzos lo hisei fonav l'saftu alzos Suru eidu ad lo shiyor Vayamanu sur v'mat yisod mushiyot. B'nei krav kekarav l'olsa lo shiyot. Vayaru hayarim l'melech yoshiyot. Odeinu otzem einav begev yom al-chatzim. Chetz acher chetz marim lo chatzim. So adu b'samu k'matra lachitzim yizraku bo shlosh meyos chitzim. Kali mitu acharav azon mod sofiyu v'yad mitzui nefesh ma'asav hefiyu. Ruach sfosav hiftzah midiyu tzadiku Adonai kimari sifiyu. Sisi nov kikanos olam l'shalem shonam ba'avon b'tzom. Tam kesem hatov amzu b'for shamay koneinu elov kolecha yuom. Tam kesem hatov tav b'mikrechot kos b'gidol ishtos. V'weish nasa shmita kegod hakol esos. Toloi esrim v'shtayim eharos shasos. Kisaftu lo echa b'esrim v'shtayim osios. Osos Kinnos lubata mecholi es kichachti mecholi zamosi kiladi ha'ili. Rashati v'nosati v'nutash oholi. We're going to skip ahead to the kinna that begins with the words a ko. Actually, let me give a brief mention the one before this ahali. We'll go to Eiko in a second. The kinna ahali, which is a little bit before, these are all the kinnas we have read so far, and everything in the Sefer Kinnos, the ones we've skipped, at this point have all been written by Rozar Kalier. The one ahali, again, has a reverse olive vase. Ahali is reference to Beis Hamikdash. Ol Moed, my Mishkan, my Mikdash. Again, the first line, Ashto'avta alo bereshis, which you desired from before the world was created. The Kisei HaKavod, which according to the Gemara was created before the world was created. L'tzarfo. Okay. And why did it end up getting destroyed? And that's the thread of that entire kinna is, the references to the Beis Hamikdash from Psukim, from Mishnayos, from Gemaras, okay, and then why was it destroyed? The kinna Eiko, to play on words. Eicha is the same letters as Eiko, but the ko here, ko, means where is the ko? Here he goes back to Psuk. He goes up to Chumash, mostly Chumash, and then a little bit at the end, his from Tisha, Yehoshua, and some other Svarim in Navi Zechariah. And I'm just going to, what we'll do is I'll explain the stanzas of this kinna, and then we'll read it through the way you read a kinna with a mourning tone. But first, let's explain what the kinna says. Okay? A ko. Where is the ko? What's the ko? Kores la'ava petzach. Avram Avinu at the Bris Ben Absarim. The Bris Ben Absarim was the treaty where Avram Avinu was instructed to shecht the animals, cut them in half, split them, and have the two halves on different sides. So they were petzach. Petzach is a splitting. It's the Kalir's poetic way of referring to the splitting. Bris Ben Absarim. What does it say there? The pasuk says, "Ko ye zaracha." Okay, and we're going to go through every time the word "ko" is written in Tanakh or in Chumash and parts of Tanakh with the words of a bracha, words of a beautiful time that Klal Yisrael was in beautiful circumstances, and we're then going to compare it to times of tzara. So a ko, where's the ko? Omer koris la'ava petzach. So what I'm going, right, where is it? And today, Ata, we are swallowed up, Bulu Atzamai Beretzach, our bones are swallowed up in murder. Loma Elokim Tanach Lenetzach. Why, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, have you forsaken us? And it seems to be forever. So first we'll read this one stanza as a kinna, and then we'll go on to the next one. Eiko Oimer Koreis Liov Benetzach Vivris Beit Absari Ko Yelenetzach Vein Ata Bulu Atzamai Beretzach Lomo Elohim Zonach Dolenetzach. When Avram Avinu and Yitzchak went to the Akedah, so they were accompanied by just two of their Meshorim to Avodim. According to the Medrash, it was Eliezer and Ishmael. And at one point, Avram turns to Eliezer and Ishmael and he says, "You stay here with the donkey who took us here. Va'ani v'hanar neilcha adko." I and the young lad, Yitzchak, 37 years old, of course, but he was a lad, will go adko until that place. Again, the word ko. So where is the ko, says the Makonin here. Where is the ko of Gush, right? When he came quickly. Kisela ad Ola, Yitzchak came and was very willing to be an Ola, Korban Ola of himself, l'ratzosecha, to satisfy what you had instructed his father Avram. And we said, Neilcha ad ko, we're quoting the Pasuk. Okay, again, the word ko used in the Pasuk at a time of wonderful relationships between Klal Yisrael and the Ummah and the Rabban Shalom. Pitu beit bosecha. And now we're chopped up into pieces. Rayasecha, your beloved one. According to the Shir Hashirim, the Ra'aya, that all of Shir Hashirim is a hint to, is Klal Yisrael, describing the relationship between Klal Yisrael and their Rebbeinu Shalom. We are the Rayasecha. So at this point, at the time of the Churban, Yesh and Apcha, your nose is furious at the sheep. I'm just going to take out a second before we do this Parak inside, and then I'm going to show you another theme that Kalir wove into this. He wove into this not only, right, the Eiko. If you have a Tehillim handy, Tehillim Ayin Daled, chapter 74. Maskil Osaf. According to Rabbi Hirsch, it means a chapter of Tehillim which we will learn a lesson from, an intellectual lesson. Maskil Yosef, Lama Elokim Zanach Lenetzach. Why, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, have you abandoned us seemingly for eternity? Yesh Rabcha B'tzon Marisecha. Why is your fury burning against the sheep of your pasture? This chapter of Tehillim, the whole first part of it, is the woven in, okay, in each stanza of Eiko, the last words. Okay, if you notice, the first stanza in with Loma Elokim L'nach L'netzach. That's the first pasuk. The second stanza is going to end with Yesh and Apcha B'tzon Marisecha, which is the end of the first pasuk. Okay, he's going to be going through all these pasukim, okay, from Maskil Liosaf, which is the description of the Churban, one of the chapters of Tehillim that describes the Churban. Okay, we have Kuf Lamed Zayin, we have Ayin Daled, describe the Churban. Of course, these chapters of Tehillim is why the higher critics, shall we call them, lower critics, which is more accurate, decided that our traditional sources for Tanakh are wrong, because how could David HaMelech write the Tehillim and talk about the Churban of the Beis HaMikdash, which took place almost 500 years after he passed away? How can that possibly be? The answer, of course, is David HaMelech wrote him in Nevuah. Well, if you deny Nevuah, then obviously you're going to have to reach the conclusion that David HaMelech didn't write parts of Tehillim. If you accept Nevuah, then there's no question. So this was part of the fact, and when you hear about this, you hear about people with differing or disputing opinions as to the Masorah we have. Most of it starts from the fact that they don't want to believe in God, they don't want to believe in Tehillim, they don't want to believe in Schar V'Odesh, they don't want to believe in Nevuah and prophecy, they don't want to believe in reward and punishment. All of this is why they came to conclusions such as Tehillim was written by after David HaMelech's days, and Yeshaya was written by 3 different authors. All of it is all part of the same mistaken and wrong denial of Yesodus of Yiddishkeit that we have. So going back to this capital of Ayin Daled is the theme with a ko. We put the two together. So we're now going to read the second stanza. You can read with me, particularly if you're muted. Eko gosh kuselio lo l'ratzasechu nechu ako pitu beidasechu ve'nata dakru kafelach rayosechu yeshadako b'tzo marisechu. Yaakov Avinu, in his attempt to support his family, he made a deal with his father-in-law Lavan that instead of getting a normal wage, he would get the animals that were speckled, funny colors. In this way, there could be no denial as to who owned what, and Lavan couldn't claim he was taking more than he was entitled to. Yaakov's animals look different. So, Imko Yomar, if, right, when we said that they should be speckled, then all the sheep were born speckled. That's what the pasuk says. If he said that they should all have certain colors on them, unusual colors, then they had those colors. So we see how the imko yomar, if he would say it this way. So again, Kalir's a ko, at the time that we're saying a cha, and we're mourning the Churban, where are all these miraculous, where are these ko's? Where are these tremendous miracles? Ko, where is the ko? The promise that akudim nekudim misuos that you had in the mishuos, which is the dreams, the mess and the prophecies. Yuchash os, where there was such an obvious miracle. V'hein ata, and today, vikachta, from the word of vikuach, here means to be punished. Ir Malaya Shuos, a city that had once been full of cheers. Pasuk in Yeshaya describes the city of Yerushalayim as being full of everybody laughing, singing, happily dancing. Shuos, the city full of Shuos. Instead, now we turn again to the pasuk in Tehillim Ayin Daled. Harima Pamecha L'Mashuos. Okay, your feet were elevated in destruction. Eko avtochas akudim nekudim b'meshuos imko yoma yuchashos v'nata v'kachtim le'atshuos harima piyamecha l'mashuos. Moshe Rabbeinu goes out from Paro's palace. He sees an Egyptian beating a Jew. He's among the Jewish people of Gan Na'ul, which the pasuk says in Shir Hashirim, is Klal Yisrael, the garden that protected its purity. As they accuse the Jewish people, how could you possibly say that you're pure if they ruled over you as slaves? Then they also ruled over your women, and your genealogy is not pure. Chazal tell us, so the pasuk tells us, really Chazal explained it, and that's why Kadosh Baruch Hu put a Yud and a K around each of the Jews' names to show that Kadosh Baruch Hu himself attested to the purity of the Jewish people. There was only one instance of an Egyptian taking over the Jews, a Jewish woman. That's the one who was the Egyptian was the one who was beating this Jew. Chazal tells us all the same story. And this Jew, the son who conceived from this Egyptian, couldn't find a place in Klal Yisrael, and he was then Megadef. He cursed the Kadosh Baruch Hu. All these stories put together in one passage. Kalira, these two brief lines, puts together this whole story. The Gan Na'ul, he refers to Klal Yisrael as, which is the point that the Kedusha of Klal Yisrael remained. Okay. Chosam Eidus Kodesh, they were sealed with HaKadosh Baruch Hu's testimony to their sanctity. But now the month of Av has destroyed them. And again, where are we ending? The last few words are from Tehillim Ayin Dalet. Kol Heira Oya B'Kodesh. You can join me as we read this. Eiko Zom Harag Mitzri Beganu B'Kodesh Vayifen Kovacha Chosam Eidus Kodesh Veinatach El Kamoch El Chodesh Kol Hero Yeh B'Kodesh. The next Eiko. When Klal Yisrael was redeemed from Mitzrayim, Ko Somar, the Beis Yaakov, V'Sagei L'Bnei Yisrael. Beis Yaakov came first. Beis Yaakov was the women. Beis Yisrael was the men. If Beis Yaakov wouldn't join, there was no point in taking out the Beis Yisrael. There'd be no future. Without a woman training her child in the emotion of what the Torah is, what our Masorah from Klal Yisrael is, the education that the father gives is worthless. We first need the emotion of identifying with the Jewish people and relationship with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the facts, the education of the father to take place and to take effect on. Today, the rebellious ones sit b'veis v'yudecha. Look today, who's on the Har HaBayis? Unfortunately, there are now Jews who go up to the Har HaBayis. Halachically, many of them are going up. It was a avera that Jews couldn't do for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years. There was one avera Jews couldn't do. They couldn't be matami the Har HaBayis. Unfortunately, people go up today to matami the Har HaBayis because they don't keep the halachas properly of what it is, what type of Torah you need to go. And the only way to insist on that is the way that all the poskim, virtually all poskim have said, under no circumstances should someone go on Har HaBayis today in order to avoid anyone from going up the Isser. The few that go up the Heter, they know if they're taught the halachas correctly, but they're leading others to go up. And even when you do go up on Har HaBayis, the Heter, you're not allowed to go up to tour. You're only allowed up to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to daven, right? Legally, you're not even allowed to daven there. It's a very unfortunate, there's really no heter today, the way the circumstances are to go up on Har HaBayis. What does the Mekonin here tell us, right? Bogdim b'veis v'yudecha. But why they use the word bog? Bog means rebellious ones. There are other terms to use, worse terms to use. No, the word bogdim is deliberate here. The Muslims claim to serve Hashem. The word Islam means hachna'ah, to submit. That's the word in English. To submit to God's will. But they have their own idea of what God's will is, and the God's will they've created is so anti-God's will that although they worship a magnificent, powerful God, their God is not my God. Right? It's a totally different manifestation, understanding of what God is. Whether that makes them idol worshippers or not, I'm not going into now. Most poskim hold they don't have the law of idol worshippers, right? Which has differences in halacha. That's not the point for right now. The point is that that Kalir realizes all this. If Kalir was early enough before the Muslim era, which is when most Mefarshim place him, then he obviously had a tremendous Ruach HaKodesh here in choosing these words. If he was after the Muslim era, then this was deliberate, that he picks Bodgim Bebeis Yudecha. They sit there, they play soccer on the Harabayas. Right? They won't allow Jews go up to David, but they're busy playing soccer. Okay, this stanza ties in, right? The stanza of Ko Tomar, which is before we got the Torah at Har Sinai, okay, and we created a nation. Your enemies roared in the middle of the Mikdash. Okay, all of this is tied in. In other words, he got to the Perek in Ayin Daled in Tehillim at the same point that he described all the same description we're having. Ey koto, kishulach ol avodecho, kosomar lishalach ol miodecho, veinat yashvu bogdim bebeis yudecho, shoagu tzarecho, bekerim moadecho. When is the killing of the firstborn in Mitzrayim going to take place? Ko Amar, so said Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu says, Kachatzos halayla, about midnight. And we know HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Bachatzos halayla, at midnight. HaKadosh Baruch Hu could say at midnight. I could say that I'm starting to speak at 9, and I don't really know if it's 9 or 9 and 25 seconds, or even 9:02 possibly. When the Kodesh Baruch Hu says Bachatzos, it's at midnight. But the people to Moshe Rabbeinu was saying wouldn't know that that's Bachatzos. They may think it's at midnight, and it's really a little early, a little later. So he says Bachatzos, about midnight, that they shouldn't think that a Kodesh Baruch Hu was inaccurate. What's happening instead of that beautiful miracle that took place to show the difference between Klal Yisrael and the Umas HaOlam? They go up and walk on the Harabayas wearing their shoes, the Na'aleim. And we know that you're not allowed to go on Harabayas, the entire Harabayas, right? You're not allowed to go with carrying your money belt, right? Wearing anything on your feet, you have to be barefoot. Some osos, and even worse, as the Kapitel Tehillim says, as Ayin Daled, as Mizmor also says in those last words, they made their own songs. We know the Beis Hamikdash was full of miracles, all sorts of miracles in the Beis Hamikdash. When Titus got up on the Harabayas, the general and later on the emperor of Rome, when he was destroying the Beis Hamikdash, so it says he took his sword, he stabbed the parochas, the curtain outside the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So we would imagine you take a sword, you stab the curtain, and it tears. Well, it bled. Curtains don't bleed. So Titus said, I must have killed their God. That's why it's bleeding. I stabbed their God in his heart. His heart was in this curtain. I stabbed him in his heart. He bled. He's dead. I've killed the Jewish God. Times don't change. Titus was an idol worshiper. That's quite clear. The Rebbeinu Shalom turned to him and he said, Rasha ben Rasha ben Beno shel Esav Rasha. Bria ktana yeshli. I have a tiny little insect. I'm going to see how are you going to fight him? And it curled into Titus and it picked away his brain. And Titus was both if you can imagine the pain of having a mosquito peck away at your brain. This is what happened to Titus. He gradually got madder and madder. He went more crazy and more insane and in more pain and in greater pain. As the years went on, famous story, the Gemara tells us that one day he passed a blacksmith. You ever been in a blacksmith shop? The sound is deafening. And the deafening sound of the blacksmith stopped the Yatush from pecking. So Titus said, oh, I have a solution here. And every day he had all day long a blacksmith. That was the cure. The cure was this blacksmith pounding away, and that stopped the Yitush from pecking away at his brain. And he paid a non-Jewish blacksmith for the work, but when he had a Jewish blacksmith do it, he didn't pay him. He said, listen, the fact that you're seeing how much suffering I'm having, his words were, you see your enemy suffering. That's more than enough payment for you. So Titus thought he had a solution, and for 30 days he had a solution, but after 30 days the Yitush got used to the noise. What's the expression, get used to anything? He got used to the noise, and the blacksmith would come in and pound away, and the Yitush would continue pounding away at Titus's brain. Didn't do him any good. And the Gemara describes how when Titus died, the Romans opened up his brain, and they saw what type of a size of an area of a bird had been carved out of his brain by the mosquito. You imagine what type of agony this was. Some osos, but I want to point out some modern associations to this. How many years ago was it that Time magazine had a cover story, Is God Dead? In other words, they accepted that there was a God who was a creator, whoever wrote this philosophy, but God's not involved in the world anymore. Now, we know that there have been philosophic systems that believed in this. That's not the new idea here at all, right? But the fact that they took common signs of today and are interpreting it not according to Tanakh, not according to Chazal, not according to Mesoras Yisrael, and therefore reach a conclusion that God's not involved anymore. He may have once been involved, but he's not involved anymore. Instead of understanding the obvious. We have Tochachas in the Chumash. They tell us what's going to happen if we don't listen to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We don't listen to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Tochacha happens. So now you come and blame HaKadosh Baruch Hu for, where was God? What do you mean, where was God? He told us that's what was going to happen. He very much was right there. So instead of a Yitush today, we have a virus. The virus comes because of a virus. So we know that. Okay, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is talking to us. Do we know all his lessons? Of course not. Do we have Nevi'im today to tell us no? But we can derive, and each individual can figure out on his own, right, what the osos are. Let's read the paragraph. Eko krisos kadashos krisos. V'cho amar b'chatzos laila b'motzei osos. Vein hatalu hakubin aleim esos somlosos somosos. Kosomar. When the Beis HaMikdash, the Mishkan was going to be built. Vehin atan yatzu b'nei avla. And as the Pasuk says in Tehillim again, Yivodak maybe Lamola, he thought he was directing his chopping actions. He's destroying the Beis HaMikdash, but that's not what he wants to destroy. He wants to destroy HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And destroying the Harabayas by making it a Muslim place of worship The Romans destroyed the whole Harabayas. They shaved off the whole top of the mountain. They refused. They made it into a city of idolatry. The Greeks made the Beis Hamikdash into a base of Avodah Zarah. All of this, of course, we learned, but even the Muslims, with their understanding of what God is Yivodah K'mei Lamala. Who's their main enemy? The main enemy is Jews. Why is their main enemy Jews? Their main enemy should be idols, idol worshippers, or those who don't accept any God. No. They're using God as a subheading. They're using him as an excuse. They have their own ideas of what they want to be, and they super embed it onto their description of what God is. That's Yivodah K'mei Lamala. No question that that's what they have, what they are doing, what they have done, what they're envisioning, what their goal is. Echo Mishma Moshe Allah, Kosamalin Vas Bayis Hamulo, Behein Atani Atsua Bnei Ablo Yivodah K'mei Lamala. In Minig Ashkenaz, we don't even duchen Tisha B'Av in the morning. But the Kinnos now refers to the ko, a ko. Right? Where is this ko that HaKadosh Baruch is telling us about? Where's the ko Savarach Les B'nai Yisrael? This is how the Jews are blessed. Lashishim Gibarim Daimais. The 60 letters of the Duchening. Yirach Hashem Yishmerecha, count them. They're compared to the 60 Giborim, mighty warriors that surround Shlomo HaMelech's bed, which also is included in the 600,000 people of Klal Yisrael that came out of Mitzrayim, 60 rivavos. In English, there's no word for 10,000. In Hebrew, rivavah is 10,000. 60 rivavos. Clearly, we have this all hinted together, but there's deep Kabbalah ideas here that Kalir is just hinting at here. The 60 Osios Hakadumos, the 60 early letters of the Duchening, that are compared to the 60 powerful warriors of Shlomo HaMelech. Vein Ata, and now Osku Redumos, okay, they are fast asleep. Bisvach Eitz Kardumos, right, while the Osku, the ancient ones, are sleeping, the walls of the Beis Hamikdash are being chopped apart. And again, those last words are taken from like Maskeli Yosef, Telemayin Dalit. Eko siach shishim osios hakadumos, kosavarchu l'shishim gibarim daimais. Vein ato askur redumos b'svach eitz kardumos. Bilam, very interesting parsha of the Torah, Parshas Bolak. The only parsha of the Torah in which Klal Yisrael and our antecedents are not actors. We wouldn't have known the whole story of Bilam if we hadn't been told it to it as a nevuah, we would never know what happened. The whole parsha is about this interaction between Bilam and Balak and the Malach and the donkey. And Bilam turns to the messengers that come to him from Balak, and he tells him, go back, go to Daber, these are the instructions. I want you to go back and tell Balak, excuse me. Go tell Balak this. Go to Daber, go back to Balak and tell him this. Go back to Balak and tell him this. Where is the ko? The ko to Daber. What happened to it when we were Kadosh Baruch Hu is taking care of us in ways we don't know even he's taking care of us. We don't know where he is, right? We don't see him. We know he's taking care of us. We know that when Bilam wanted to curse the Jewish people, so we have a big machlokas in the Parsha. What would his curse have accomplished? According to one opinion, Bilam knew how to create a thing, take a thing called Shas HaRegiz, a time when the Kadosh Baruch Hu gets angry at us, and he can take the angry, that time when the Kadosh Baruch Hu gets angry, and he can make it into a tremendous calamity, a tremendous punishment on Klal Yisrael, to destroy us potentially. According to other approaches, let's say the Ramban, he had no such power. So what would have been the calamity of his having succeeded in cursing the Jews? It would have been an incredible Chilul Hashem. Bilam cursed the Jews, and then we suffered afterwards. We did have tragedy. Jews died. They died because we were Oivra Avera, because of Bilam's advice. But people would have associated it that's because we were cursed by Bilam. That's why it happened. There are other versions here. Whichever parish we say, we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was taking care of us. And we knew he was taking care of us when we had no idea.
So they all pack into the
Until
car.
the very end of the parsha. There's no excuse me. The Jewish people are not an actor.
And friends.
We're talked about.
They get into the car, they're driving along the way.
Somebody please mute themselves.
Excitement's building.
Somebody is
And they see that
unmuted.
highway that says 10 miles to the amusement park. It's so exciting. Everyone's getting ready, putting their sun hats on already. And then we see 5 miles, excitement's building. 1 mile, the exit's here. They go off the exit. They see the tall road. Jumping out of their seats. They can't wait to get out of the car.
Click on the bottom left-hand corner of her.
Thank you. Where it says mute is me.
Speakers. They get out of the car. They
On
run
this
to the
person.
Sorry?
The one that just popped up. There you go.
Okay, everybody's muted again? I'm sorry about that. Okay, back to Bilam and Balak. This parsha is the only one of the Torah from the time of Bereshis until the Zos HaBracha that the Jewish people are not the actors in the story or our antecedents. We are not actors. Through almost the entire parsha, we're talked about, but we're not the actors in the story. We're right? When the putz, that machutzah, the person with a huge amount of gall, wanted to curse, right, and ended up blessing. Putz lakov, he wanted to curse us. Uberach am kedushecha, and he ended up blessing our people. B'shuv v'kos adaber. Humar l'kedushecha. Okay, and and now these enemy nations have come and attacked our holy city. They've turned our Mesa Mikdash and burnt it. And again, the last words are from Tehillim, Ayin Daled. Join, but please leave yourselves on mute. Eko potzlako biracham kedushechu b'shuv b'chasadaber. Echo, the Levium. Levium were being dedicated to help out the Kohanim in the Midbar, where they would be carrying the midbar, disassembling and carrying the midbar from place to place. Disassembling and carrying the Mishkan from place to place in the midbar. And in so doing, the Levium went through a procedure where they were sanctified for Dori Doris, generations and generations. Ko sas lehem, again the word ko, where is the ko? That procedure that was taken. L'taharam, which was purifying the Levium so that they could serve a role of Beis Halamecha, to the base of Mikdash, which is meant to stand forever. Vein ata rashu v'yirishu samecha. Now they're using major noise. They make a lot of noise. They make weddings, and we hear their blasting of their firecrackers. Okay, I guess their marriages are firecrackers before they even start. The noise we hear of their pretending to join people to their mosques. Other noise they make in the world scene about all sorts of things. La'aretz chidlu mishkan shemecha, and the Mishkan remains destroyed. Eiko kichas leviyim shleimecho kosas Elohem v'taharam leveis Elomecho ve'inato rashu v'yirishu shamecho la'aretz k'menu mishkan shemecho. We finished the sources in Chumash that he's going to take, but he still has two more letters, the Aleph Beis, the Shin and the Tov. So he's going to have this one from Yehoshua and the next one from Zechariah. Yericho. Kosasa Sheshas Yomim. For 6 days, you're supposed to go around the city of Yericho, blow the shofar, Shiva Shofros Eretz, frightening sound of shofar. Shofar is a very frightening, powerful sound. Makes a very, very powerful sound to properly blown shofar. Ko, where is the ko of the 7 shofars with frightening sounds that were blown when Kosa Sheshas Hayomim? Lahapil Choma La'aretz. And what was the result of it? It knocked over. Not knocked it over. It knocked down. The walls went straight down into the Aretz. The walls of Yericho went down like an elevator shaft down, went straight down into the ground. Of course, we know that Kalir is going to compare this, right, to the walls of the Beis HaMikdash and the Harabayas being destroyed. Your gates are also buried in the underground. Sarfu chomoadei el ba'aretz, the pasuk says in Tehillim. All the established places, the Ol Moed means a place, right? Moed Yom Tova means a set aside place in time. Ol Moed means a set aside place in physical. There's place set aside places, set aside times, right? Ada, set aside group. Va'ad. Okay, so Moadei El Baretz. Ko Shiva Shofros Eretz, Ko Sasar Sheshis Yomim Lafil Chom Al Aretz. Veinata Sharim Tov Al Aretz, Arfu Chomoadei El Baretz. The last one is not a reference to a specific Koamar, probably, but to predominantly in Zechariah and many other Nevi'im, in which the Kadosh Baruch Hu tells us through his prophets that the future will be beautiful, wonderful. We'll have all sorts of wondrous things happening. Koamar Hashem. At some time in the future, we will again be celebrating in Yerushalayim, and we will have weddings in Yerushalayim. We will have these with all these beautiful Koamars, right? And Ko, where is those Ko? Shuas Asamai Otzar. Okay, that our bounty, right, will again be reestablished with the Koamars, Asher Lenados Natsar, which was set aside, protected for the future. In the meantime, our young men are swollen, like we describe later, in the Chatzar of the Mikdash. How long, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, will our enemy blaspheme, reproach us? There's a close. This is this close, but the close has a very powerful message. The powerful message here, there's a difference in our crying. We cry on Tisha B'Av. We mourn on Tisha B'Av. We sit on the floor. We don't wear our shoes. We don't eat. We don't drink. We're still mourning 1900 plus years after the Churban. Still in our tikuf of mourning. We're aware of the possibly invented story of Napoleon that when he was in Egypt, he happened upon a shul on Tisha B'Av, and he asked, why is there such mourning going on? What has happened that the Jews are mourning so much? And they told him in the famous line, whether it's true or not true, I have no idea, was that Napoleon was supposed to have said, a nation that mourns its past will celebrate its future. A lot of tremendous amount of truth in this statement. Whether he said it or not does not remain. When we mourn a loved one. You are sons to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Sons to HaKadosh Baruch Hu means that we belong with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're sent to this world temporarily. This world is a prose door. It's a temporary place. Havel havolim amar koheles. Hevel means short-lived, temporary. We're here for temporary purposes. Havel havolim means, right, we're here for a temporary purpose. We're in a anteroom.
Abby, I'm sorry, we got cut off. Can you go back to Napoleon? What did Napoleon say?
Sure. Are you with me now?
I'm with you now. We got cut off in the middle of the sentence. A nation that mourns its past.
Okay. The nation that mourns its past will celebrate its future. If a nation keeps track of its past and knows its past, it has a future. As long as we know we have our past, we know we will have our future. We know that we are here, we are Banim Atem Lashem Lekechem. Somebody loses a tragedy, close relative. We know our place is to be with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're here on a temporary basis, a temporary purpose while we are here. Therefore, says the Pasuk, Banim Atem Lashem Lekechem. Don't cut yourself. Don't rip out your hair. We have halachas about this, yes. Our experience is this worldly. When we are experiencing this worldly, we know as a result that when we lose somebody's missing, they're gone, we miss them, we feel a tragedy, right? We need to go through mourning. And therefore, Chazal gave us the dinim of Avelis. 1 day of Avelis has certain halachas, 3 days of Avelis have second halachas, 7 days of Avelis, up until 30 days of Avelis in Shloshim. At the end of Shloshim, there's no Avelis. The fact that a person keeps Avelis for his parents and only his parents for 12 months, Kaddish for 11 months, Avelis for 12 months, right? That is more an act of respecting parents. That's a kibbud av va'em Avelis. The mourning period itself is over after 30 days. There's no more real Avelis. A hesped, everything, Avelis ends after 30 days. 30 days is the time that a person should go through the emotions of Avelis, and after 30 days, Avelis ends. Okay, it's time to get on. Banim atem Lashem Elokechem. We're children of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Our place is with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He sent us here for a goal and a purpose. Mashal l'ma hadavar daimeh. A king sends his son as his emissary to a foreign nation to carry out a mission for him. He's supposed to establish political contacts, economic contacts, and the son is there, and he's accomplishing wonderful things, tremendous things he's accomplishing. Now he knows he's not going to be there forever. His mission is temporary. He's supposed to come back to rejoin his father at some time in the future. In the meantime, he's building and building. He's building economic things and political things and all sorts of wonderful things. And it's not ready to give over to somebody else. And we've all been in a place where we're building something, and we know that eventually we're going to give it over to somebody else to take over. That's our goals. Everybody's goal in life. If you construct something, you build something, you want it as a future. You build your children that they should stand on their own 2 feet. You build a community that it should grow. You build a Torah organization that it should outlast you. You build in order that it should have a future. And a future in Hashem's hands. The son is building in the message of his father, the king. One day he gets an emergency message. Come home immediately. Son is shocked. He knows if he leaves at this moment, everything he's been working on will collapse. There'll be nothing left. Nothing at all is left. If he leaves right now, there will be nothing left. No telephone to pick up and call dad to find out what the king really wanted to tell him to stay under these circumstances. No fax machine, no email, no Zoom, no Skype. He gets a sudden message, come home immediately. What does he do? He comes home immediately. And what does he leave? Everything. You were sent to this world for a purpose, for a mission. I know what the mission is. You don't know what the mission is. You only think you know what the mission is. I'm the one who knows what that mission is. And I'm the one who's going to tell you when it's time to come back. It seems like you may be in mid-mission. It seems like there's more for you to accomplish. I'm telling you, you've done your mission. You're coming home. Havel havolim amar Koheles. Havel, says the Ramban, doesn't translate as vain. It translates as temporary. Koheles says everything in this world has tremendous value, but it's temporary. There's nothing in this world that's permanent. It's all temporary. There is a place where value has permanence. Havel havolim amar Koheles, havel havolim hakol havel. Everything that you see in front of you is transitory. It's temporary. It has temporary value. When the Jew mourns for the destruction of the Mikdash, it's his realization that there is permanent value and it will be returned. He's not mourning permanent loss, he's mourning temporary loss. When a Jew mourns in Avelis, he's mourning temporary loss. We know, right, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his relationship with us is permanent. His relationship with Klal Yisrael as a nation is permanent, and that there is permanent value there. As long as I maintain my relationship with Klal Yisrael, I'm a part of Klal Yisrael, and Klal Yisrael will have a permanent relationship. My mourning for Tisha B'Av is mourning the temporary loss. It's not all is lost. Unfortunately, when a Jew loses his relationship with Klal Yisrael, as unfortunately happened with Jews in Germany in the 1930s when the Nazis came to power, there were Jews who committed suicide because they saw nothing. They had given over their entire lives to German culture. And to see German culture become Nazism, they didn't know what to do. They had no solution. Everything was lost, right? But a Jew understands that his role and his relationship, all these losses are temporary. There's an amount of mourning we do and no more, right? There's an amount of loss we feel and no more. We cry intensely, but we cry knowing that the future will be beautiful. How Napoleon could have seen such a thing in a Jewish community in Egypt is what I find baffling. How could a man with Napoleon's mind have seen all that? That's why I wonder if the story's true. But the message is undoubtedly true. Eiko chuas asomayosar. B'cho amar asher ladaros notzor. Beinato tibchu brachai b'chatzor ad mosai Elohim yifarei tzor. As he closes the Kinna and the words from Kapitel Ayin Dal into Tehillim, Maskil Yosef. For how long will it be, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that the enemy will scold us, will blaspheme? We know it's not going to be forever. We know it's going to end. We'd like it to end today, but we know it's going to end. We don't know when, but it's going to end. The parak is called Maskil Yosef. Maskil Yosef sounds like a strange word, particularly if you learn Maskil as a musical reference. This is a musical chapter, not a musical chapter. It's a chapter of destruction, but it's a chapter of lesson. Maskil is a teaching lesson. A teaching lesson, it tremendously is. It's a teaching lesson that goes beyond Tisha B'Av, beyond mourning, beyond Tehillim. It's a teaching lesson that we take with us every moment of every day. Every moment of every day we understand how HaKadosh Baruch Hu teaches us, how we're part of Klal Yisrael in our lessons, in our growing, in our teaching, how we become part of Klal Yisrael's growth and Klal Yisrael's future. How every day our battles of becoming part, stronger part, a more intense part of the relationship between Klal Yisrael and the Rebbeinu Shalom. The next kinna, Zechor Asher Asa Tzar B'fnim. In some editions, it's the next kinna. Some editions, it's the kinna before. But you'll find it. We hinted at it. It was hinted at in one of the previous kinna, one of the previous kinnas, the first one. Kalir is describing the Churban Bayesheni, destruction of the second base of Mikdash by the Romans. Vespasian Aspasionis had been the first general. There actually were generals before him, but he was the first main general. Famous story, the Gemara tells us that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai met Aspasionis, and he told Aspasionis that you are going to be appointed the Caesar. You are the Caesar, not you're going to, you are the Caesar. To which Aspasionis answered him, you deserve capital punishment for that. You should be executed for that. First of all, I'm only a general, I'm not a Caesar. To call me the Caesar is a rebellion against the Caesar. A rebelling against the Caesar is a capital crime. Second of all, he said, if it's indeed true, as you'd say, that I am the Caesar, why didn't you come until now? Where have you been until now? And you deserve to be executed for that. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai answered him, that which you have told, you are the Caesar, you just don't know about it yet. How do I know you're the Caesar, says Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai? Because I have a proof from a pasuk that the Mikdash and Yerushalayim will only be given over to the hands, right, of an emperor, king. It won't be just a general. So you have to be an emperor. And that which you told me, then why haven't I come until now? Unfortunately, we have an internal war going on, civil war among the Jewish people. There's a group called the Biryonim. They're the ones who are waging war against the Romans. The Gedolei Yisrael, long ago, did not want to wage war against the Romans. We were very willing to let the Romans have power. We should eliminate the Jewish country as a nation. There should be no Jewish nation. There should be a Jewish religion with a Beis HaMikdash, and the Romans are politically in charge. We were perfectly fine with that idea. We recognized that the Jewish nation had long since lost its goal, its purpose. We weren't anymore following. A Jewish nation has to run according to halacha. A Jewish nation has to have the type of a king who on Shemitah year gathers together Hakel and reads to the Jewish people from the words of the Torah. And he is the political leader. If we don't have political leaders who recognize the greatness and need of the religious leadership and that they are entire purpose is as religious headings to be political leaders following halacha. We don't have that. We have no purpose in having a Jewish people, Jewish country, excuse me. There's no purpose to it. We have leaders, kings like David and Shlomo and Yoshio and Chizkiyahu, kings like that, kings like Agrippas in his leadership abilities. We should have a Jewish monarchy, a Jewish state. When not, we have no purpose in having a Jewish state. However, the Biryonim didn't allow that, and they were in political control. They wouldn't let me out. So that's why I came late. While they're talking, a messenger came from Rome with the following message for Aspasianus. The emperor is dead. The leaders of Rome elected a new emperor, which was the way it was done in Rome. The emperor was an elected official most times. And they've elected you, Aspasianus, to be the next emperor of Rome. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was 100% correct. Aspasianus was already emperor, just that he didn't know it yet. Aspasianus, of course, was very impressed by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's understanding, his knowledge, erudition. And the long story, he allowed Yavne to survive. He allowed the family of David HaMelech to survive. So we have Malchus Beis David continuing, and we had the Sanhedrin continuing. In the meantime, Aspasianus left and placed in his stead his son Titus. Titus, the Gemara says, was one of the greatest Rishayim that the Jewish people ever faced. And the story here is about Titus. Titus enters the Beis Hamikdash grounds, takes out his sword, Zochar she'asa tzar b'fnim, Shalav Charvo, he takes out, he unsheaths his sword, enters L'snai v'L'shnim into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Jewish people, Nachlasenu b'Eis, are frightened. He takes the lechem upon him, which is still there. The Beis Hamikdash is in functional service at this point. He takes the lechem upon him for himself. He takes his sword and he stabs through the parochas. Balas shtei panim, which has parochas has different appearances on different sides. Looks different. It was woven in a way, has different looks. Goes through describing step by step, right? How many people he killed in the Beis Hamikdash grounds. As he left the Dayas Hamikdash, Harbo Malay Adam, with his sword filled with blood. And then he comes and he said, this is Titus talking, oh, the Egyptians, all the other nations, okay, they were not successful, but I'm greater than they are. And that's why I beat them. To which the Makoning, Kalir, responds, but what happened when Nodav and Avihu, all they did was, right, they took a Torah that they weren't commanded to do, and they paid with their lives. Avosenu zara ke'echnisu bachurav achla eish. Our fathers, expression, it really wasn't our fathers, Nodav and Avihu had no children. They brought in the young men, brought in a foreign fire, and they were consumed by fire. Vizo soa zoina hichnis. The Gemara tells us that Titus brought a prostitute with him into the Kodesh Kodashim, took the parochas off the Kodesh Kodashim, used it as the cover of his mattress, and was mazana with the zona in the Kodesh Kodashim. Outside the Kodesh HaKodashim, the people were responding, if Zadav and Avihu were destroyed in fire for what they did, of course, Titus will be destroyed now. Lo nichesh, and no fire destroyed him. Because, as the Medrash describes it so eloquently, HaKadosh Baruch Hu removed his presence. When Kedushas Klal Yisrael isn't there, HaKadosh Baruch Hu removes his presence from the Kodesh Beis HaMikdash. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence is in the Beis HaMikdash, nothing can happen to it. When he removes his presence, his Shechina, from it, whatever that term means, he removes the special Kedusha. As was said by a great Gadol of Hirsch, the nace is not that the two Batei Mikdash were destroyed. The nace is that they weren't destroyed hundreds of times. I'm paraphrasing. There where Eretz Yisrael is located, Davar Pashut, that every nation of power should have been destroying Klal Yisrael. We're in a very bad location. If you were wanting to set people up to grow and develop without any foreign influence, you would probably send them to New Zealand, maybe Iceland, somewhere, some South Pacific island, somewhere where they're completely isolated, maybe Curacao, somewhere where there's nothing nearby. You wouldn't send them to the middle of the Fertile Crescent where everything goes through. Anybody wants to travel from Africa to Asia is going to go right through. And we met every major civilization in that area came against us. You wouldn't put us there. We were there for a different purpose. As long as we keep the Torah's mitzvahs, then Klal Yisrael is protected, Eretz Yisrael is protected, Mikdash Yisrael is protected. The moment we no longer keep the Torah and mitzvahs, then it's their chateva that they're going to destroy us. That's not the nace. The nace is that we survive, not the nace is not that we're destroyed. All the klei that were there, Titus removed. He took out of the parochas that he had taken, made a huge sack out of it, a huge bag. He took all the vessels that were there in the mikdash that were easily movable, placed them in the bag. In the words of the Makonin here, Lo matzah tishum shlosha klei, that's a Mishnah in Talmud that says the daily work in the mikdash, the work in the mikdash required 93 different types of kalim. He's just using this as a bar expression, 93 klei sharis. Doesn't mean 93 number, it means 93 type. 93 types of klei sharis were removed from the mikdash and placed in the sack, brought to Rome. In the Arch of Titus, which still is existent, and I've seen it, and I've seen the engraving, it shows a picture of the soldiers of Rome returning to Rome with the Klei HaMikdash. The menorah is quite clearly portrayed there. Okay, you see the menorah that they're carrying back from Yerushalayim to Rome. The next two parts here, Noshim Kasharu. We went through the Mikdash, the big Kodesh Kodashim. No one's allowed on Har HaBayis with shoes on your feet. You have to be barefoot. And he not only went through the whole Har HaBayis, he went into the Mikdash, into the Kodesh Kodashim, still with his shoes on, and did the most blasphemous thing anyone could ever imagine doing in the Kodesh Kodashim itself, as the words here describe, Sachanaso Hishritz. I'll let you look up the translation yourself, but it's a very nasty, almost vulgar way of referring to it. Bachurimi bachutz sogu mechuzakim, and the young people outside said, we'll get rid of him because Yuzak b'shishim ribo mazikim. There are 600,000 mazikim standing outside. Again, 60, we talked about that before, 60, 10,000, right? The 60 that stood around Shlomo Melech's bed to protect it, the 60 letters of the Duchening, right? All of these come together. There are 60 groups of 10,000 angels protecting the Kodesh HaKadoshim when the Kedusha, the Kodesh HaKadoshim is there. And the older people were shocked to see that he continued Asos Ritzano, he did what he wanted to. V'hu, and he HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Asur Bazikim, he considered himself tied up, fettered up, tied up in chains. Not that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was ever tied up in chains, Chalila. But he removed his Shekhinah, and by removing his Shekhinah, he allowed it to treat as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu was tied in chains, and allow Titus to do what he does, allow the Wakif to do what it wants to do in the Makom HaMikdash. All that's part because HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Shekhinah is still in Golus Mekadshei Kadoshim. At this point, Kalir changes the context. Okay, until now he's been talking about the story of Titus. Henceforth, the next piece he talks about a different context, also in the time of the Pluribin from Rome. The first one, Shabbat Sotain, which probably refers to Bavel, Yavo Admon, Vayasaviv, Chomo, Vayavai Samon, large amounts of troops to surround the Mikdash. Nafal Evra al Nine Pitzel Lachluz the Armon, the descendants of Yaakov Avinu. Ad Kinush Midok Armon, until the Shamayim, the Kisei HaKavod, which is juxtaposed to the Makom HaMikdash, the Dok Armon. Okay, Dok is the Shamayim, the thinness, the thin layer that exists as heaven. It's not mine, it's Kalir's, but Kalir's is based on Pasuk in Yeshaya Perek Mem. That the abandonment of the Dok Armon, or really the relationship between the Kisei HaKavod and the Mikdash, Al Pesach Harabayis Heichel Levo Biyad Arba Roshei Safsarim Hafribo. The four generals that came to decide which wall they were going to destroy. This goes back before the time of the Churban. The four generals was a story earlier. And the question was, who was going to destroy which one? Al Tzad Ma'arvi Lezecher Hisrit Bo. The general in charge of the western wall decided not to destroy it. That's why the Council Ma'aravi still stands. Vitzog Achar Kosleinu below Rav Rivo. He didn't fight his battle. He defied his orders, and he didn't destroy it. Right? And the Shekhinah stayed on that wall. And the Chazal tells us the reason why the Shekhinah stayed on that wall was because when they built the walls around the Bayis Sheni, so they had the wall, the Kosel Ma'aravi was the wall built by the Aniyim, the poor people. The Ashirim were in charge of building the other walls. The Ashirim hired contractors to build the walls for them. The Aniyim didn't have the money to hire contractors. They had to do it themselves. So if they hired it themselves, right, that means that they had, excuse me, they built it with their own sweat and tears. The Kedusha that was left, right, in that wall could not be destroyed. HaKadosh Baruch Hu refused to take his Kedusha off the wall. The derech hateva of it was that the Roman general defied orders and didn't rip it down. But that could have been another way HaKadosh Baruch Hu could have done it. But the reason why it wasn't destroyed was because the Aniyim built that wall with their own tears. Now we change topics again. Again, it's all talking about the Roman Hurban. But Kalir put these stories together into one kapitel, one kinno. You took children who had never done anything wrong, and you put, according to the Gemara, 300 young boys and girls that were put on ships to go to Rome. And the Gemara says, that they knew for what purpose they were being sent to Rome. The young girls knew that they were being sent to be sold among Romans as prostitutes. And the young boys knew that they were going to be used as male prostitutes for the Roman leaders. And the girls asked the question, if we jump over the side of the boat, we know that the halacha is against suicide. We know that a person's not supposed to take their own life. We know that it was the assimilated Jews in Germany who lost all sense of future and took their own lives when the Nazis came to power. We know it was the Benos Beis Yaakov who kept life going in the horrors of horrors in camps as long as they could. And these girls said, is it different if we kill ourselves in order not to be used for an Aveira? Not to be used for Aveira. Dor shebehem hagadol shemehem, says the Gemara, the oldest said, right, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has told us in Navi that he will redeem those who are lost at sea. Of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to redeem those who are lost at sea. What was the Kiddush there? If someone was on a ship that went down, you mean he's not going to have a Tzviyas HaMesa? Of course not. Can't mean that. It must refer to our situation in which we're drowning ourselves at sea of our own volition, something that would otherwise be a Dvar Aveira, but in our circumstances is the ultimate Dvar Mitzvah. It's the ultimate Kiddush Hashem that we should not be used for a Dvar Aveira. As soon as he darshan, the Gadol Shubahem, the oldest of his young group of children, sent this drasha over, the girls one by one jumped overboard. They were the first ones to jump overboard. Amar Yaladim, Kal v'chomer be'atzmon. The boys said, Ma hein shadarkan b'kach. Unfortunately, it's for Aveira. Unfortunately, it's for Rome. Unfortunately, it's for all sorts of tragic reasons. It's to be used for all sorts of Chilul Hashem. But at least on some level, it's not perverse to humanity. What they want us for is perverse to humanity. It's against everything humanity stands for. Aim darchan b'kach. For sure, ben benoshel kal v'chomer, that the Chilul Hashem that they want us for warrants it, and then they all jumped over. Ata katzafta, he says. The Yershes Lefanos, he allowed the Romans to take away young children had never done a chait. They were too young to have done a chait. Lama rog shugoyim lo shata al hamincha pnos, and he didn't face the offerings that they were making. V'shulchal eretz Uds, and he sent them to Rome. Uds, according to Pasuk and Bereshis. It's a long story how we get to it. Not going to both of them, but the reference of Eretz Uds is to Rome. B'shalosh sfinos, on 3 boats. Hashivenu, going back to Eicha. Shivu, they davened, they prayed. Kiba'u b'nifre yom, when they jumped into the seas. When they faced the sea, they davened, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please accept us. V'shidtu atzam yachad, they gathered themselves as a group together. Limpo b'yam. Shir v'sishpachos shomeru, they sang praises to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ke'al yam, on the same level of praise that Klal Yisrael sang when we were saved from Kriyas Yamsuf. Ki alecha ragnu. We were died on your behalf. In Tzilas Yam, in the depths of the sea. Ki tahaymes baru at nafashan. As the depths overwhelmed their lives. Calls of Vastu, all this happened to us. Ba'aleinu Vastu, occurred to us. V'lo shechachnu, we've not forgotten any of it. Chilu l'makshan, tikvasa nasnu l'meishiv mibashan. Their hope was maintained to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who returned everyone from Bashan. The pasuk that they darshaned was this pasuk. Ubas kol nishman, a heavenly voice shouted out, Ura, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Lama Tishon, why are you sleeping? Why are you not responding? We'll now read the Kinnos together. Zachor asher asot tzar b'finim Shalav charbo ufal lifnai v'lifnim Nachaloseinu b'yeis k'timei lechem haponim V'diyer paroches ba'alas shetei panim Yisomin giel b'mogein ma'adam Vaymaded ka b'marei adam dom Meimeinu dolach v'hiskir chisav idam Ki yotza min habayis v'charbo liyadam Al hagoso havos gover V'nata el yado l'mulo l'gbor Mitzrayim b'chol yoyim asher b'mol V'ani b'sochu b'yorut ze'lo b'tzavot Avoseinu zara kichnisu b'chura V'zeh tzoazar nahichnis lo Avodim chitu b'sukal rabasei V'ameh b'veis eish mimorom sholachei V'nafshenu tovanu b'hotzik leisharei V'samam b'ani shayit bom l'hashrei Oreinu yimak kiskin misharei V'motzati shimu shlosha klei sharei Noshim kisharu ki va'aritz V'karka habayis le'alav hecheritz Sarim lupasu b'lo paritz V'beis kodesh HaKodoshim tzachanaso hishritz V'acharim mibachutz tzadu mechuzakim V'saru kiyuzak v'shishim ribo mazdikim Zukenim nivasu kihirshu mishachakim Asos ritzono asur bazikim Shavas sotain vayavel admoin Vayisabev choma vayavei samo Nafla evral minei pitzel achluz v'armonan Kinutash midok armon Al Pesach har habayis echel lavo b'yad abor v'shei tafsarov v'hacharibon Al tzad ma'aravi l'zecher yisribo v'tzog achar kosleinu l'rov ribo Ato Kotzafta v'hishrei solifanos Yilodim Hashem bohem komum misham lehafnois Lama rag shugayim V'lo shad el amin chapenos V'shulchum l'eretz utz v'shalosh spinos Ashivenu שיברו כברו בנבחי יום, ושיתו עצמם יחד למפול ביום. שירו ששפחוס שברו כעל יום, כי הולך להרג במצוות יום. כי סומos בו על נפשון, כל זאת בואסנו ולא שכחנו, חילו לבם שום. תקווה סנסנו למשיב, כי בשער ובאס כל נשמע, ורע Turn ahead to the kinna that starts with the word into a chal nashim period. I'm going to skip this kinna for now because I'm looking at the clock and I don't want people to run till 4 o'clock on kinnis. The minig is to do kinnis until a little bit before chatzos. Chatzos is about 10 to 1. I had figured 12:30 was a good time, and there's a lot of kinnis that I want to do yet. Obviously, I'm going to have to pick and choose. So we're going to hold on him until Chana, but Chana is something that, excuse me, Chana is something that's worthwhile to go through on your own. Powerful, very short, very powerful. Ata Marta, certainly going to have to skip, but it's also a very vivid description of many of the tsaris that we went through during the time of the Churbanos. L'cha Hashem Atzdaka, and by the way, every one of these kinnis that we've seen so far is by Kalir. Again, one of these comparisons. L'cha Hashem Atzdaka, you were provided us with such wonderful things, such righteous things. When X happened, and he goes through the versions of Jewish history when they happened. And Lona Boshes Haponim, the various and sundry things we've done through Jewish history, ranging from even at the Yam Suf when we didn't want to follow HaKadosh Baruch Hu's instructions, back after all the different things in the Midbar that the Jews did, Achan raiding the spoils of Yericho, which were not allowed to be touched, Moshe Rabbeinu giving tochacha to Klal Yisrael last week's Parsha Dvarim, Lovim Chatzeres V'Dizov, right, that he gave us tochacha on. The complaints the Jews had about the man, Tzela Micha, Micha's idol that he had placed in what's called Pesel Micha, through the entire Jewish history, and it's just, it's an overview of Jewish history, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu did us such wondrous things, we did not reciprocate in kind. Hatei Elokai Oznecha. Again, a kinna we're going to have to skip. Arze Halavanon. I grimace as I think about skipping Arze Halavanon. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through it quickly. Just tell you what it's about, and we'll go, let's talk about it on the side. If we have time at the end, we'll do it afterwards. No halacha says kinnis has to be done in order. Arze Halavanon is about the Asar Harugim Malchus. The 10 great Torah leaders who were murdered by the Romans. Now, we have several versions of the Asar Harugim Malchus. First of all, several places the Gemara tells us individual stories about some of them. We know about Rabbi Akiva having the iron combs rip apart his flesh because he was teaching Torah in public. We know the story of Bava, who after Rabbi Akiva was martyred, He took 5 Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. The Romans had established a rule that smicha shouldn't be given over. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava took 5 Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. The Romans said, not only will we kill whoever does it, we will destroy the cities that are nearest. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava went between 2 cities, and he went on a mountaintop, and the Romans caught up with him anyway, and they followed him. He gave out the smicha to the 5 of them, and he sent them on their way. And he stayed behind for the Romans to capture him and execute him. And it goes through all the different great Tanoim that were killed in the Asura Malchus. We have 4 or so versions. We have Arzi Alavana, which is part of our Kinnos, Tisha B'Av. This, by the way, is the first Kinna that we have that is not written by Relazar Aliyah. This is written, the one we have, it was written in Tkufas Rishonim. We also have the Alela Nibochia Slicha, we say on Yom Kippur. After the very end of Musaf on Yom Kippur, we say a Slicha that is also about the Asura Malchus. There's a Slicha on Som Gedalia, and there's a Slicha on Erev Rosh Hashanah about this. There are many Slichas. There's also Midrashim. The story of the Asura Malchus is very powerful. They didn't happen at one time. It was over a period of time. It was not one event. The first murders were done before the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. The last was at least 60 years later. We know that Rabbi Akiva was killed, was murdered after the destruction of Beitar. Right? Beitar was almost 50 years after the Churban Bayis, or 52 years after the Churban Bayis. And after the Churban Bayis, they set new terrible rules. That's why Rome is called Malchus HaRasha. The Gemara doesn't have to refer to Rome by name. It just calls Malchus HaRasha, the evil kingdom. And we know Malchus HaRasha, the evil kingdom, that's a reference to Rome. After the Bar Kokhba revolt, which is 50 years after the Churban, the Akiva thought Bar Kokhba was the Mashiach initially. Other Gedolim told him it's too early for Mashiach to come. Not going to be Mashiach. But after Rabbi Akiva was only the 3rd or 4th of the Asura Malchus. The other 7 were killed later. And the Medrash goes to great lengths that the Asura Malchus were a kapara for the Mechiras Yosef. I'm not going to spend time on it now. We did, maybe we should, but not time for it. To go through what is the association of the Asura Malchus to the Mechiras Yosef, and what were the Averis that the Bnei Yosef did, how could they think to sell? And this is hours of conversation in and of itself, which is going to have to happen at a different time. Arzi Lavonon is simply a description of some of the Tanoim. As a matter of fact, we have different versions and different Piyutim, and different Midrashim as to who exactly were the 10 Asura Malchus. And descriptions of how their ends were met. Hopefully we'll get back to this, but for the moment I'm going to hold on it. And I'm going to go to the next one, which is Hacharishu, in my edition, the one I have in front of me. As I mentioned, we all have all the Kinnos. We're talking, some editions of Kinnos have them not in the same order. Hacharishu is one of the 4 Kinnos that were created in the times of the Rishonim, obviously not by Kalir. Kalir was long gone by these times, hundreds of years gone. There were 4 Kinnos that we have written that were because of the Crusades. In the Crusade period, huge communities were destroyed. The description of some of these Kinnos is very detailed. One of them describes the dates, the actual dates that the Crusaders came to different communities. In some cases, telling them that they could take the cross, they could baptize, or they would be killed. They were killed, Kiddush Hashem. That's mentioned in the one in front of us, Hacharishu. If you look down to, I think it's the 5th stanza, 1, 2, 3. It looks like it's the 4th stanza. Begins with the words, Os hiskimu gedolim uktanim lekabel ba'avel din bov avel din shofim onim. They had already been described. They've been asked to, they've been told they should baptize or they would be murdered. And they came and they said, they accepted the Ahava, the law of Shochim Oinim. They would not accept. They were the Nergu Hamonim Hamonim. They were killed multitudes and multitudes. The fathers, in cases, killed their children, so that the children shouldn't be seized and baptized and taken away to be brought up as Christians. Torah chigrisak. The Torah itself binds itself in sackcloth. We read about in Megillah Esther how Mordechai dressed up in sackcloth. That was the old message of mourning. You put clothing. Sackcloth means it was made from goat hair, too rough to wear as clothing. The difference between hair and wool is what you do with it. Wool is very comfortable on the skin. Hair is not comfortable on the skin. Sock is the words that the Torah uses for something that's made from a rough material. Therefore, you don't use it as clothing, you use it as bags. They wallowed themselves into the ashes. The next Kinnos Navi describes the tragedy of the son and daughter of Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol. Shmuel Kohen Gadol himself was one of the Asara Herugei Malchus. He was the first of Asara Herugei Malchus. He was a gorgeously looking man, as the Medrash and the Hayatanim tell us over the story. The daughter of the Roman emperor requested he be left alive because she wanted him as a slave to look at his handsomeness, beauty. He made a deal with her. He said, instead, we'll make him into a stuffed animal for you. We'll remove all his hide, his skin. We'll stuff it, and you can look at him as much as you want. He'll be very nice to look at. And they removed his skin while he was alive. His son and daughter were seized by the Romans and sold to taskmasters. Like their father, Rabbi Yishmael, they were very nice looking. The taskmasters discuss among themselves. The story is recorded in the Gemara and its basis for this kina. One day, they come and talk to one another. I just bought a slave. What a gorgeous looking male slave. And in Rome, a slave like that had a lot of value for his stud value. And the other one said, I also bought a very nice looking slave. And they said, hey, let's make a business deal. We'll put these two slaves together. They'll have offspring. They'll be very good looking. In Rome, slaves that are good looking to be used for Divrei Avera are very valuable. We'll have a good business deal going here. We have a side business going. They took the son of Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol in a dark room one night, and the daughter. They were both knew exactly why they were being brought to this room, but they had absolutely no idea who they were with. Each one of them cries the whole night. Ben Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, how going from being ultimate in Tzidkus and Chesed and Limud and Godless and Torah, perhaps one day he would have been a future Kohen Gadol for all we know. And the daughter of the Kohen Gadol, with the household she had hoped to build, now we are captives of Romans to be mated with who knows what, from where, what culture, what belief system, what religion, what gods. How horrible. The two of them, each in the corner of their room, cried, davened all night long, until morning came and some light shone into the room, and they could see who they were with. My brother, my sister. The two of them embraced, cried, according to the Gemara, cried until their souls gave out. L'zos Yekonen Yirmiyah, B'She'iyah, he closes. With this, Yirmiyahu Hanavi cried out at the tragedy that happened. She'iyah is the same word as Shoah. The horrible Shoah that was happening, horrible Holocaust. But Yirmiyahu Hanavi lived at the Churban of the first Beis HaMikdash, and we're describing the Churban of the second Beis HaMikdash. Here we have a Kinna, again, referring to Yirmiyahu's Nevuah, just like we mentioned before. It's no conflict that David HaMelech has chapters in Tehillim that describe the Churban of the Beis HaMikdash, which was hundreds of years after he was gone. Or that Yeshaya HaNavi, right, describes the Geula and the Nechama that will happen, the consolation that will happen after the Golus. And that Yirmiyahu Hanavi can indeed be referring to Nisim that happened and the story that happened of the son and daughter of Yishmael Kohen Gadol. Of course, the question here, we have such major tragedies, and we're going to talk about more tragedies. And there were Kinnos written about the Holocaust, which unfortunately did not become popular. In most places, they're not popular to say the Kinnos that were written because of the Holocaust. I know of only a few Kehillas which say them regularly. There are Kinnos written about the York massacres. There are Kinnos written about the Gzeres Tach B'Tat. Many tsaras we've had, Jewish history. Just to mention a small aside, Poland was officially a democracy between 1918 and 1939, 20 years. Anybody have any idea how many pogroms took place in Poland during those 20 years before it was overrun by the Nazis? Somebody want to guess? I can let you can unmic, or you can unmute yourself for a second. And just give a guess if you want to. Anybody want to guess how many pogroms took place in Poland during this 20-year period?
I guess 300.
Okay. Okay, please mute yourself. Anybody else want to guess? The answer is 10,000. 10,000 recorded pogroms took place in Poland during those 20 years. Okay, do your arithmetic. Figure out how many that is per day. Okay. That was a relatively calm part of Jewish history because it's between the tsaras of World War I, when all the communities of Eastern Europe were destroyed, and the tsaras of World War II, the Shoah, the Holocaust. Stop and think for a second. We have such major tsaras, and we have a kinna written about the son and daughter of Rabbi Yishmael Kohen Gadol. And the answer is simple. We get numbed by numbers. 6 million is a big number. None of us can relate to it on any level. But when we talk about the specific tzara of Benu Bas Rabbi Yishmael, and we cry because of their loss, we can internalize what happened on a small level. Once we've internalized on a small level what we can feel, we can then try now multiply it out by 10,000 pogroms in one small period of history, by 6 million people killed in the Holocaust, by the destructions of Gzeres Tach B'Tat, where the Poles, the Ukrainians, Khmelnytsky, who's still a national hero in the Ukraine, and you find statues of him all over the Ukraine for being their George Washington of the Ukraine, who was a vicious anti-Semite. The physical cruelty of the Gzeres Tachbatat, of the Ukrainians in Gzeres Tachbatat, was much greater than that of the Nazis. Other time, I'll tell you stories that they reported by people who witnessed it. We have witness testimony. The Tosfos Yontif wrote a book. He's not the only one who wrote what they went through in the Gzeres Tachbatat. The Ukrainians were much more viciously anti-Semitic. They just weren't as organized as the Germans were. Much more vicious in their hatred. But reading through some of these stories, we can begin to have an emotional level. It has emotional impact. And then from that emotional impact, we can grow to the next stage, which is we can try to multiply it, but never losing a whole view of the fact that this is temporary. This is this world. This is how Rabbi Shalom told us will happen if we don't use this world as we're supposed to. Right? This is what might happen. This is what will happen. Going to skip ahead to Og Balof Yirmiyahu. I mentioned this kinna when I gave a shir earlier this week. This is another Kalir kinna. Medrash tells us that at the time of the Churban, we're talking about Bayis Rishon, the first base on Mikdash, Yirmiyahu Hanavi was told by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to go to the Avos and the Imahos and Moshe, I think Aaron too, I have to go check the Medrash, and tell them to come davening for Klal, let them know what happened to Klal Yisrael. Yirmiyahu Hanavi went to the various Avos. He went to Maras HaMachpelah. He went to Kever Rachel. He apparently knew where Bilhah and Zilpah were laid to rest. He even was able to find out where Moshe Rabbeinu was buried. Even though it says, Lo yada ish es karas ad hayom hazeh, he was able to find out according to the Medrash. And each one of them came and pleaded with HaKadosh Baruch Hu on behalf of the Jews. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu answered their complaints. And they had no answers to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. His arguments against them were more powerful than anything that he could say, that they could answer. Until Rachel came on the scene, according to the Medrash. This is the Medrash in Eicha Rabbah. And I'll just read and translate the Medrash. It speaks for itself loudly enough. Ba'osa Shah, after HaKadosh Baruch Hu had heard the arguments of Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov and Moshe, and Leah and Bilhah and Zilpah, according to some versions of the Medrash. And he answered them. B'oisa shah kafza Rachel Imeinu. Rachel Imeinu came. L'fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'yomra. Rebbeinu shalaylam. Goli l'fanecha sheYaakov avdecha ohavti ahavo Yisrael. Rebbeinu shalaylam. Only you know to what extent Yaakov loved me. The Avad Bishvili Li'ava Sheva Shanim, and how he had worked for me so diligently, for my father, for 7 years. When those 7 years were finishing, Higiyazman Nisui Labali. It came time for my wedding. Yoatz Avi Lahachlifeni Labali Bishvil Achosi. Love on my father had this plan. Rachel's a pretty girl. I can find anybody to marry her. Leah is a excuse your Miola Kaganov's expression, homely. She's not that pretty. She's around still. She's, excuse my expression again, an old maid. She's not married yet. I'm having trouble finding a shidduch for her. I'll just sneak her in. You have no idea. Only you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, know how difficult it was for me emotionally. How much I loved Yaakov, how much I was waiting to create a household with Yaakov. He know Doli Ha'etza, and I knew the plan. And I said, oh, I can outsmart my father. I'll figure out how to do this. Hodiase Levaili. I told Yaakov about the plot. Umosarti lo simin sheyakir beini ubein achosi. And I gave him over all the different signs I had done, that when it comes the day of the chuppah, he'll be able to know if behind that veil is myself or is it Leah. Kadesh lo yuchal avi l'hachlifeni, so that Lavan won't be able to replace me with Leah and successfully. Yaakov will catch on. Well, Achar came, but after I gave Yaakov all these simonim, and I gave them to, right, I was mechamti ba'atzmi. I rethought the situation. The solvalti es tavosi, and my tremendous desire to marry Yaakov, rechamti alachosi. I said, what is going to happen with my sister Leah? What's going to happen to my poor sister Leah the day of her wedding? She's going to go under the chuppah. Yaakov's going to give her simonim. She's not going to know how to respond. And he's going to walk out from under the chuppah. Can you imagine a greater embarrassment to anyone than that? I couldn't do it to my sister. Erev chofu achosai. That night, they got my sister ready. They put her a beautiful wedding gown. They played it. She used the collar. Umasarti la achosi kol hasimonim shemasarti lebali. I gave over to her all the simonim that I'd given to Yaakov. Kadesh Yisavurshi Rachel, that he should think it's Rachel. And then I realized that's going to take care of the chuppah. For a kal to be quiet through the chuppah is not so difficult. She doesn't have to say much of anything. Nods her head. She doesn't say anything. She's behind the veil, a little bit of head nodding. What's going to happen afterwards? Yaakov's going to speak to her, and he's going to understand it's not my voice, it's Leah's voice. And the same story is going to happen, just it won't be under the chuppah. The same level of embarrassment, I cannot do that. Cannot do it. Below Ode, Ela Shechnichnasti Tachas Hamita. I knew where the beds, and I slipped under the bed before Yaakov and Leah got there. And when he spoke to her Leah the entire night, the Hishosekis, she was quiet. And I responded to everything that she said. He would talk to her, and the voice was mine from under the bed. Kadesh lo yakir l'kol achusi. He never knew it was Leah. He never heard her voice. V'gomalti chesed imo, and I did an incredible chesed with her. V'lo kinesi bo. I took no vengeance. V'lo hotzei l'cherpa, I did not allow her to be embarrassed. Uma ani Shani Bosser Bedum, from flesh and blood, human emotion. Offer of Ephraim, here today, I'll be gone tomorrow. Lo Kinesi Lutzara Shali, and I didn't take my proper place over someone who was improperly taking my place. Below Jose see not to embarrass you. The Ato Melech Chai V'Kayim, you, living king, Rachaman. Mipnei Ma Kinesa, what are you jealous of? Avodah Zarah? She'ein ba mamish? It has nothing to it. V'higlesa bonai? And because of that, you drove my children into exile? V'nergo b'charev, and they were destroyed by the sword? V'asu oivim bam kirtonam? And their enemies treated with them as they wished? Closes the medrash miyad. Niskagul rachma shal Kadosh Baruch Hu. At that point, Kadosh Baruch Hu's mercy was aroused. V'yomer b'shvilech Rachel. Ani machzir es Yisrael l'mkayma. Rachel had no doubts. Your children will be back. How did see if the pasuk says Kol Hashem? The pasuk in Yirmiyahu Navi. We read this pasuk as we read it in the Haftarah for the second day of Rosh Hashanah. It's a Gemara. It says that every Bat's minig. There are many minhagim exactly how we read the Haftarah for our second day of Rosh Hashanah. But every minig Klal Yisrael reads from these psukim. Some read it. We read it at the end of the Haftarah. The minig of the old Greek minig, which is basically non-existent anymore, they start in the Haftarah from these psukim. Ko amar Hashem ko b'rimon yishmonihi v'chisam rimim Rachel mevaka al b'neha. Rachel cries for her children. Me'an alehino chev, she refuses to be consoled al b'neha. Ki einenu, because they're not here. Ko amar Hashem mini kolech libechi. Your voice should stop crying. Ve'dayach midibah, and your eyes from tears. Ki yesh sechar lefu'asech. All that you have done will be rewarded. They will return. I'm going to do 2 more Kinnos. Probably going to run overtime in the process. I apologize to everybody. There are some Kinnos that we missed today. We can't do Kinnos, I think, without doing the Kinnos in Hanos Shali. Towards the end already. So Rabbi Yehuda Levi's Kinna on how he bemoans in his day. Yehuda Levi, right, lived in the 12th century, early 12th century. He writes with beauty about how we miss Eretz Yisrael. Because of the time, I'm not going to read through everything inside. I'm not going to go through it with commentary. I'm just going to read it in a moment. I'm just going to tell you what we're going to do now. I'm going to read through Tzion. We're then going to sing the Kinna Eish Tukah B'Kirbi, which we have to go back up on. And then we're going to sing Eli Tzion. And for the rest of the Kinnas, we're not going to, so hopefully we will never see them again. There was apparently an old minig, I've heard about it, that Jews took their Kinnas every year. And as they read the Kinna on Tisha B'Av, they tore the page of the Kinna and put it aside to put in the knees. It was shameless. Next year, I'm going to be keep Tisha B'Av again? No way. No way. The Gemara tells us that those who mourn over Yerushalayim will be zeicha to see it b'vinyana. That doesn't mean that in this lifetime we will be zeicha to see it b'vinyana. We're part of Klal Yisrael. We'll be zeicha to see it b'vinyana as part of our neshama, perhaps with the Tchiyas HaMesim, perhaps prior to Tchiyas HaMesim, but we'll be zeicha to see it. I'm going to be reading Tzion Alo Sishali. We're going to be chanting Eish Tikad. We're going to be chanting Eli Tzion. And then I'm going to go to Ashrei. So we'll be doing the end of the davening, Ashrei to the end of davening. Obviously, we cannot say the appropriate Kadeshim. So I'll just say the Ashrei, and I'll say Ashu Von Tzion and Elenu, those first. And I wish everyone that we should have an easy fast, a meaningful fast, and should be zeicha to see the Binyan Yerushalayim, Yimhera v'yameinu, amen soon. Tzion, halo sishali, v'shlom asiroyim. Dor shlei shlomech v'hem yeser adaroyim. Miyam u'mizrach mitzafon v'seimon shalom rachok v'karov. Sei mikol aborayim. U'shlom asir v'tikva nosein vav katel chermon mitzaf v'ridom al haroyim. Livkos and Useich Anisanim. Ve'esach lom shivas Useich Ani Kinor l'shiroyich. Libi leveisel fniel ma'od yehemel l'machanai. V'chol pigei taroyich. Shoma shchina shchein Allah v'yotzre posach l'mul sharei shachak shorayich. וכבוד אדוני לבד היה מורך בין שמש בשר וכוכבים נרויך אבחר לנפשי להשתפך במקום אשר רוח אלוהים שלוחה בחירויך עד בייס מלוכה ועד כיסא אדוני ואיך יש לעבודייך Alekis os viroyich mitznei mishotei b'mekayimais asher niklu Elohim l'chazayich v'tziroyich miyasa lich in afayim v'achik nedon onid v'visrael v'videi v'sroyich Epoli apai alei artzech v'etzeh abonayich miod b'achonenes afaroyich Av ki b'yomdi alei kibros abusai v'eshtomei b'chevron alei mitchak foroyich Har ha'abarim v'hor asher sham shnei orim gdolim meiroyich amoroyich Chayenu shamos avir artzech mimar drar avkas aforeich B'nofes tuf l'haroyich minam v'nafshi haloich arom v'yochei alei chorvot shmama shahoyut v'royich B'mkom aronech asher nignas B'mkom kruvayach asher shachnu chadrei chadaroyich Agos v'ashlich ve'erin Israel v'akol zman v'chilel be'eretz miyos n'ziroyi Ech yarav li achol shtos ve'esach ezek yischavu haklovim estiroyi O ech mar yom hi mosok le'inai ba'od erek yifyarvim b'grein sharayi Kos hayagonim la'at Harpi ma'at kikvar maluch salai v'nafshi mi'merayich Ez karo holo Ve'eshtech hamorech ve'ezkoro li'avo ve'emsoes shmorayich. Siyan klilas yofi, avas v'cheitik shrimayos, uvach nikshu nafshos havirayim. Chaim hasmechim l'shavosech ha'kovim al shemolosech, uvochim al shvaroyich. Mibor shvi shoafim negdech mishtachavim ish mimakomo elinochach shorayich. Et rechamonecha asher golu is pasru mehar legihom l'shachu gzeiroyich. Hamachzikim b'shulayich u'misamsim la'alos lechos b'samsineis l'royich. Shinar ufasros ha'ya'archuch gadlavim hevlam yadamu l'sumayich l'royich. Elmi yadamu mashichayich elmi neviyayich elmi leviyayich v'sharayich. Yishnev yachalov klil kol mamlechos ha'elil chosnech li'olam yador v'dor nizorayich. Ivech l'moshav v'hola Elohayich v'ashrei anosh yivchar v'yikrav yishko b'chatzeiroyich. Ashrei mechakev yagir v'yir alos orech yitkaku alav shcharoyich. V'rais b'tovas b'chiroyich v'lalos v'simchosech b'shuvech elekatmos l'royich. The Kinna Eish Tukad B'Kir B, which you have to back up for almost for sure. Eish Tukad B'Kir B, B'halo Siyali B, B'tzei Mi Mitzroyim, Kinim Oiro, L'manas Kiro, B'tzei Mi Yerushalayim. Oz Yoshir Moshe, Shilo Yinashe, B'tzei Mi Mitzroyim, Vayakonen Yirmiyahu, V'nahon Nehi Nehiyah, B'tzei Mi Yerushalayim. Beisi Hiskonon, B'shachan Helanon, B'tzei Mi Mitzroyim, V'chamas El Shachno Alai Kananu, B'tzei Mi Yerushalayim. Kale Yom Namu, V'chachom Akamu, B'tzei Mi Mitzroyim. Zdodim Shatafu, Baruch Shitafu, B'tzei Mi Yerushalayim. V'gan Shamayim, B'tzor Yazub Moyim, B'tzei Mi Mitzroyim. Lana V'samarim, V'mayim Amarim, B'tzei Mi Yerushalayim. Ashkem v'harei, Tzvivos har chorei b'tzei Mi Mitzroyim. Korei al Evel al Naras Bavel, B'tzei Mi Yerushalayim. Omarei kavod Adonai ke'eshel chelos l'fonai, B'tzei Mi Mitzroyim. V'cherev l'tusha, l'tevach l'tusha, B'tzei Mi Yerushalayim. Zevach u'muncha v'shemen hamishcha b'tzei Mi Mitzroyim. Segulas el lekucha katzor latifa b'tzei Mi Yerushalayim. Chagim v'shabbosos moksim v'osos b'tzei Mi Mitzroyim. Tanis v'yevel r'do v'hevel b'tzei Mi Yerushalayim. Tov v'oholim li'arba ha'tivolim b'tzei Mi Mitzroyim oholei yishmaelim. Umachanos arelim, b'tzei Mi Yerushalayim. Yovel u'shemita v'eretz shoketa, b'tzei Mi Mitzroyim. L'chur latzmitzuz, v'charus lachrisus, b'tzei Mi Yerushalayim. Chaporis v'aron v'avnei zikaron, b'tzei Mi Mitzroyim. V'avnei hakala uchnei habola, b'tzei Mi Yerushalayim. Leviyim v'aharonim v'shidim z'kainim b'tzei Mi Mitzroyim. Noksim u'monim u'ochrim v'tonim B'tzeisim Yerushalayim, Moshe Yireinu, V'Aaron Yancheinu, B'tzeisim Mitzrayim, Nebuchadnezzar Tifsar, Badvianos Kesar, B'tzeisim Yerushalayim, Narov Milchama Vadonai Shama, B'tzeisim Mitzrayim, Rachak Mimenu V'neinenu, B'tzeisim Yerushalayim, Sisrei Paroches, Sisrei Maroches, B'tzeisim Mitzrayim, Cheimani Tachas, V'olai Sachaches, B'tzeisim Yerushalayim, Olos Zevachim V'Yishei Nichalchim, B'tzeisim Mitzrayim, B'chutzos V'dukarim, B'nei Tzion HaYikarim, B'tzeisim Yerushalayim, Harei Mikvos L'chavod, Hanei Mikvos, B'tzeisim Mitzrayim, Shrikos Usros, V'kolos Usvos, B'tzeisim Yerushalayim, Tzitzazoho, V'hamshel B'roho, B'tzeisim Mitzrayim, Hushlach HaNezer, V'yofas HaEzer, B'tzeisim Yerushalayim, Chusha U'Nevuah, Uchvod Adonai Nira, B'tzeisim Mitzrayim, Nigala Umara'am, Ruach HaTumah, B'tzeisim Yerushalayim, Rina Yeshua, B'chatzotros HaTeruah, B'tzeisim Mitzrayim, Zakas Olol, V'nakas Chalol, B'tzeisim Yerushalayim, Shulchan U'Menorah, V'chalil U'Torah, B'tzeisim Mitzrayim, Elil V'soivo, Fesel U'Matzeivo, B'tzeisim Yerushalayim, Torah U'Seudah, V'Seder Avodah, B'tzeisim Mitzrayim, Sasain V'Simcha, V'Nas Yadain V'Ana, V'Shuvi L'Yerushalayim. Towards the end of your kinnis, you should have Elitzion. Elitzion is usually sang rising, standing. I'm not going to stand myself. Everyone is invited to stand. I'm not going to stand because I'm not sure how I'm going to get the computer and the mic to stand properly. So I'm going to say it's sitting, but everyone else is invited to stand for Elitzion. After we finish Elitzion, we're going to go straight into Ashrei. I am going to shut down my computer, but I'm going to leave the mic on if you want to join us for Ashi Valtzin and Eleno. But I plan to turn off the video and just have the mic on while I do that, and I'll take the mic with me while I stand for the Eleno. If you know the tune, feel free to join Elitzion, and the women who are muted off can feel free to sing it without worrying about anybody else hearing them. So, Elitzion v'yareho, k'mo isha v'chibsu lach adurasa, al ba'al nureh, Aliyad Marmon Asher Garash, Biashmas Tzon Adoreho, Bial Bias, Sof Mikdash Adoreho, Alei Galus Misharis Eil, Bimei Shiz Moreho, Bial Damam Asher Shupach, Mo Meimei. Alei Hagyon Mechol Asher Domam Yorehu V'Alvad Asher V'Tzius Adrehu Alei Zivkei Sminehu Ufidionei V'Chorehu V'Al Chiluk Lehu U'Mizbayach Torehu Alei Tapei Melocheho, B'nei David Gevireho, V'al Yof Yom Asher Choshach, V'Soruk Soreho, Alei Chavod Asher Golo, V'Etz Korban Vireho, Bial lo chetz asher lo chatz. B'som sakim chagoreho. Alei machatz v'rochacho. Asher hukun izireho. Bial niputz elei selah. Olaleho niareho. Alei simchas b'saneho. B'sochakam al shvareho. V'ali nui b'nei chorim v'yideho toreho. Alei fesha asher lo derech ashreho. V'al tzvos keholeho. Shisuferho shchoreho. Alei kolos v'kolos. Beis rabu b'goreho. V'al rigshas megadeho. V'sof mishkan chatzereho. Alei shimcho asher chuka. V'fi kamei mitzareho. V'al tachan yishav. Shma amareho. Elei tzion v'yareho. Kamo ishav etzreho. V'chibsu lo charura tzedek I'm sorry, just leave the video. I want a camera for Usher. You don't think it's necessary? Okay, my wife contends I don't have to do Usher with everybody. Okay, so I should leave it on you. Do Usher. Oh, okay. Ashrei Usher V'Sech. God Almighty, no, you alone. So ain't shaking the Shabbat Masech. Adak v'yde del drain of Pesach. Lehodi elivnei adam k'bereisa v'chavai radar mahus mahus kolay lomim umemshartecha b'chol dor v'dor smichas melchol hanoshul v'seach es yodechu maspia lechol chai rotzain tzadik Adonai b'chol derecha v'chasi b'chol ma'asav k'riv Adonai b'chol peiru v'chol asher guvi emes Shomer Adonai es kol oyavo, v'yes kol rishuyim yishvit, hilas Adonai zater pi. V'yivarech kol basar shein kodshay l'yolam v'ed. V'anachnu nevarech yom yatzav yad elam, hallelujah, v'letzion goel. Shavei fesha b'Yaakov num Adonai v'atal kadosh Hashem Filos Yisrael v'kara zel zeh v'yamar kadosh 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 Adonai tzvos v'lechoretz v'idai Avin dein midein v'minka v'tisoeni ruach v'eshma harai kol rash kadosh v'yid Adonai minatayimai Adonai imloich v'yelam v'ed. Baruch HaGever Shiftach Adonai V'yo Adonai Mivtacho V'tchuv Adonai Adei Ad Ki V'yo Adonai Tzuroi Lo Mivtachu L'cha Yodei Shnecho Ki La Yozavta Dereshecho Adonai Adonai Chafetz L'man Zikai Yagdil Torah V'yadir Aleinu L'shabeach L'adonai ונאמר ויועד אלוהי במלך על כל עובד, ויאמר יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד.